Greetings and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and the D's finally got a win to open their account in 2024 and won by enough to sneak into the 8 for the 72nd consecutive round since the start of the 2021 season. What a time to be alive. Joining me tonight to analyse our dismantling of the doggies is veteran Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening to Binman. Good evening to our listeners. And for our listeners, if you got tired of all the score reviews in our match against the Dogs, just wait to see how long you can last with tonight's review of the game.
Yeah, we won't have quite as many stopping and starting as they did at the game. That was just absolutely ridiculous. And I heard Goody interviewed saying, you know, we want to get it right, but you could tell he was a bit frustrated by it.
Yeah, especially when some of them were just so blatantly obvious. You sort of go, isn't it about time the AFL sorted this out and did it properly?
They've got to invest in the technology. That's what it comes down to.
Yep.
But ironically, where I was sitting there was someone yelling about it. But the first three were actually good calls by the umpire. Like one, I actually was thinking for sure it was going to be a point, but it was a mark. There were two, in fact, that were exactly the same scenario. That the ball didn't cross the back of the line. That the only way of knowing that for 100% sure is doing the review. The one that was frustrating was the one that was out on the full by the width of.
At the end of the day, I want them to get it right. So if it means stopping, then yes, I want them to get it right. I don't want to find out we lost the grand final because they didn't do a score review.
And put the cameras in all four posts so that you can, instead of trying to look through a goalpost to see what's happening on the other side.
But cameras get whatever you need to do.
What is actually the issue though with it?
That it's never definitive.
But,
when it's going through the points, for example, they can only see from the camera that's in the goalpost. It should be a camera that looks from the goalpost into the points directly. So
what was the issue with the score reviews yesterday? Is it just that it breaks the flow in the game? Because the clock stops, so no time's lost.
Yeah, but allows defence to set. For example, also the score review, I think it was T-Mac had actually got a free kick in front of goal, but they couldn't decide whether it had gone through first or not.
The other weird one was when they ended up bouncing it. That was a massive. It didn't end up costing us, but they bounced it at the top of the square.
That's right.
It being a point, that was a huge leg up, I thought, for the Dogs, because that's if you were to put a clearance, if you were to have a ball up anywhere in your forward line, it'd be at the top of the goal square, wouldn't it?
We'll get diverted if we go on.
Digress.
And you've already heard from him, but I'll give him an introduction anyway. He's going to help us dissect the stats. He's our resident analyst, Binman. Good evening, Binman.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. Good evening, Demonlanders. And last week I had a croaky voice because I was at a music festival for 3 days, and tonight I've got a croaky voice because my first opportunity to yell at the footy yesterday, and I took full toll. I had a great day at the footy. It was terrific to be at the MCG. What a beautiful day for footy. And I was sitting above the interchange bench, and I need new binoculars because I was looking down at the board. Some interesting new information on the screen that faces the players. But I think one of the highlights that's going to stick with me for a long, long time was watching 𝗟𝗯𝗏 run off the ground near the end of the game after that pass that pass to Van Rooyen that set up one of JVR, or the last goal that JVR kicked. Just the big smile on his face, and just with the crowd going crazy and a standing ovation. It was one of the more moving things I can recall at the footy. And to be honest, I didn't think about this until afterwards, but it was an antidote to the awfulness of the finals last year. Not so much the Blues game, that was frustrating, but as I've talked about a fair bit, the Pies game was just such an unpleasant experience. So it was great to go back to the MCG, our home, and have a great day, but more importantly, see Clary, really happy up and about. And I thought it was really interesting. Gus was there in that sort of new role that's a bit undefined, but I really like the fact that the club didn't make a huge deal of it, and I'm guessing Gus didn't want it either. But hats off to the Demon Army for the initiative to have the helmets with the blue helmets. I thought that was a great touch. I was thinking, geez, I must have been getting hot in the sun with those helmets. So all in all, a terrific day of footy. And I am a big proponent for 1 o'clock games of footy now. I've decided you can get home by 4 and, it's you get to the game. So, yeah, terrific day. And one final hats off to the Melbourne membership team who were in their office busily sorting out issues, including for me with their tickets, and they were really terrific, I thought, and sorted out the issue. And obviously, they had to deal with a lot of irritated people, and me being one of them. So they did a great job making sure that I could get into the ground to see the day.
Big man, before we jump into any discussion of this week's game, we did have some feedback for you in particular about last week's podcast. Andrew L. on Facebook says, sadly, your bin man focuses too much on his stats and not the reality of Goodwin's shortcomings as head coach and the negligence of the board extending Goodwin's contract in panic when no other club appeared to have any interest in him. Window of opportunity is closing quickly to a stubborn coach who pushes his way or no way in terms of player selection and continually outcoached by more talented coaches who are willing to roll the dice and make changes during a game. Put your stats book away, bin man, and watch players who continually fail to lower their eyes and make poor choices each week and are not addressed by the coach and just uses the same dribble each week at press conferences such as, we are working incredibly hard or we will learn from it, etc., etc., etc. I don't know if he was having a go at you, bin man, or the coach. It sounds like a bit of both. You have your right of reply. Please proceed.
Well, plenty of practice over that. I wonder if Andrew knows of the thread. Is Goodwin the right coach? It's been festering on Demonland for a long time, and if we had 2 or 3 losses in a row, I'm pretty confident he'll make a comeback. My right of reply is, Andrew's, that's his opinion. I've got a different opinion, and one of my other interests is American politics, and I have a good friend who is more on the right, let's say, than I am. And when we get together, what we end up doing is agreeing to not focus on our opinions, but to focus on agreed facts. And with Simon Goodwin, regardless of what you think of his coaching, some of the facts are pretty relevant. Of coaches who have coached more than 100 AFL games, of current coaches, he's right up there with 58% win rate. He's coached for 7 seasons, made finals 4 times. He's 50-50 in finals he's played. So that's a pretty good record. Of course, he's won a flag. It's unquestionably he's Melbourne's most successful and best coach since Norm Smith. That's a fact, not an opinion, just on the record, the fact that he's won a flag. But 58% strike rate. By comparison, the coach that everyone agrees is probably the best coach of the modern era is Alistair Clarkson, and he's 56.9% over his career in terms of a winning strike rate. Another coach that often was talked about last week, in fact, speaking of the Swans, is everyone seems to love Longmire and, they hail how good he is tactically. He's 61%, which is impressive, but he's got the advantage of course, playing up the SCG. He has coached 309 games of football. So what's that? That's getting up to 10 more, 15 years, 12 years. He's he's won 1 flag. So the same number of flags as Goody has. And on the tactical stuff, it's interesting. We talked last week of the 2 different types of coach, and absolutely Longmire's, and Chris Scott is another one. He's got the 2 flags, 68.1%, which is pretty impressive. Just quickly, the other one that everyone says is a great coach, Ross Lyon. He's 330 games he's coached. 56.1% win-loss ratio. So Goody has him there, and he hasn't won a flag. So, on any statistical measure, Goodwin's right up there in the modern era. Craig McRae is often pumped up and good on him. He's won his flag in his 2 seasons. But, like Chris Scott last year, maybe the Collingwood juggernaut might hit a wall this year, or they've lost their opening 2. Fagan's the other one. Fagan is probably a really good comparison to Goody. Fagan's coached almost exactly the same number of games, 164 to Goody's 162, despite the advantages of playing at a ground where it's like a 95% win rate up at the Gabba. His win-loss ratio is 56.1. He's not won a flag. They've been a perennial bridesmaid, and they've made a grand final but not won a flag. So, by any measure, Goodwin is a successful coach. There's no question of that. And just on the tactical stuff, as I was talking about, Longmire, he's a game day tactical coach. So is Alistair Clarkson, Chris Scott to a lesser extent. That changed a bit in their premiership year. Actually, he became a more systems coach. But I think Goody has really underestimated his tactical nous. The difference is that he is such a system coach. He thinks about his tactical strategies ahead of time. And so it was fascinating, Andy, to hear his press conference this week, an interesting timing for Andrew's comment on Facebook, about the planning that went into this game. Goody's really big into analytics. He's also big into data. And so both presses, I really encourage people to listen to the Dogs press conference and the D's one. Both were fascinating in their discussion of the game plan. But Goody talked about the fact that historically in early season games, teams blow up and that they're often high possession, widespread, and that he came into the game with a clear tactical focus on lots of marks, controlling possessions. As a result, he had the most number of marks in his tenure, I think 20 odd more than he ever has. And he's introduced, a number of tactical things. You might remember back in 2017, or was the flying V off the halfback flank that didn't quite trigger it, but not long after that they introduced the 666 to stop teams doing exactly that. He also used flooding techniques, and as I was just sort of noting on Demonland today, is that whilst he didn't invent the zone, and nor did he invent the sort of that third man intercepting role, he perfected it. Every team that's worth their salt now, the Giants, the Saints, the Swans, have all basically implemented a version of Goody's all-team defensive grid. And I think he really needs to, he doesn't get the kudos he deserves for his tactical ability. He never has, partly because of the way he does press conference, but I think, and partly because he doesn't do much in-game once game starts. But this was a real tactical masterclass really from Goody in this match. And even Beveridge in his presser said he was caught unawares, paraphrasing him, about that, the way we played, the way we spread. He expected the Doggies to be able to respond to that much better, and was caught and found it difficult on the day to respond to. It was a big factor in our win. So, Andrew, respectfully, I disagree with that view, but, we can all have our opinions, but I think Goody's record speaks for itself, quite frankly.
And for Andrew's benefit, it's not dribble, it's drivel. Dribble is what you do on a basketball court or out the side of your mouth. So
it's what Nibbler does, dribbler the nibbler. Nibbler the dribbler. What it's like.
Don't go there, man.
I think I'll play devil's advocate. I won't speak on behalf of Andrew, but I think what sometimes some people do get frustrated at Goody is I'll concede he does do some of those, he's very good at some of those tactics. It's when those tactics might get found out is where some people get frustrated that he doesn't tweak things a little bit. And I'm not saying I think that way, but people say that he's stubborn and will continue going down that route, thinking that our processes, our systems will overcome it. But once they've been found out by a good tactical coach who knows how to stop our tactics, is where.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what people say. But the reality is, again, that's why that's an opinion, not a fact. And that's why I like facts. So the facts is 58% win-loss ratio. You take out 2017, I mean, we were still in struggle town. He got some good players, just like Clarkson did when he started. 2019 was a complete write-off with the injuries we had, and he deliberately, I won't say, we deliberately set up things for the future, like playing Fritter at halfback flank. And so he would argue, well, we've finished top 4 the last 3 seasons. No other coach has come close to being able to do that. Chris Scott won a flag and they missed the finals the next year. Where did, the Dogs just scraped into the finals the year, didn't they? Or in 2018, did they make the finals in 2018 or not make it? And they were a shell of themselves after we smashed them in the 21 grand final.
The highest the Dogs have finished in any season at the end of the home and away is 5th in the last 10 years.
So I take your point, Andy. That's what a lot of people's perspective is. But the facts remain is that he's got an extraordinarily strong win-loss ratio. Yeah, so, he would argue that, yeah, sure, no worries. Longmire is, Beveridge is lauded for his tactical ability, but they're our bunnies. So it's like he is a believer in the system. So, I'm not coached. I've coached basketball at junior level, and so I'm not really qualified to say which of those systems is, which philosophy is better. But he's a coach that believes in his system, and that he believes in getting the players locked into a certain way of playing. And I guess Goody would counter that record. The record speaks for itself.
I was just sort of parroting what I've read on.
Come on, Andy, you're all over Goody. Sack him.
No, I'm definitely not. Well, let's move on. I wonder whether what Andrew from Facebook thought about Goody's selections this week. He gagged them from the week, but that comment was after the Sydney game. So I wonder what he thought of them this week, and we will no doubt get into all that a bit later on because we do have some questions about it. And speaking...
Well, just before that, I will say that it's interesting human psychology, isn't it? So I was critical last week, absolutely, of the decision to start Billings on the bench and to pick Spargo. And so they were, especially Spargo, was definitely a left field thingo. And so, yeah, it's easy to bemoan those decisions when we lose. But it was equally sort of perplexing in some respects that Benny Brown, off a very short, interrupted preparation, would be brought into the game with T-Mac at the same time. And there's a question.
Well, there were a lot of changes. When does Goody make 5 changes?
Well, yeah, that's right, indeed. And 3 to the defensive unit and bringing Hoare in as well, which was less of a surprise.
We'll talk more on that.
Yeah. So, but the psychology part of it is that they all came off this week and he's not getting criticised for those decisions.
And as well, he's probably not getting the plaudits for those moves, because speaking of people that were angry after last week's games in the hot and humid conditions in Sydney, I wonder what our good friend Don't Make Me Angry thought about the game this weekend. You might recall that Don't Make Me Angry was very upset, or very angry, I should say, in his voicemail that he left the podcast just minutes after the final siren sounded in Sydney, exclaiming that our season was over. I think he said it a few times, it's over. There was no follow-up call this week. So
don't make me happy, slightly annoyed or less angry.
Each week I ask our loyal listeners to help us out by leaving us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts. We absolutely love the feedback. We do read it out on the show. And as I always say, that giving us the 5 stars, it helps boost the podcast. It brings more listeners to the show. That in turn drives more people to Demonland, and therefore we can get more contributions from more voices on this show in the form of the questions and comments we're going to go through later. So the best way you can help out the podcast is by amplifying us in the form of those reviews, and just by helping spread the word about Demonland to your Demon family, friends or colleagues. All the way from Finland, Helena writes, as an expat D's supporter, staying connected with my beloved club has always been a challenge. However, thanks to the Demonland podcast, I feel like I'm right there in the heart of the action despite being thousands of miles away. Living in Finland for the past 6 years means I miss out on the electric atmosphere of game days at the G and the camaraderie of fellow fans. But the Demonland podcast fills that void by providing comprehensive coverage of all things Melbourne Demons. From game reviews and previews to player interviews to Big Man stats analysis, the podcast keeps me informed and engaged, bridging the geographical gap between me and my beloved team. Andy's genuine enthusiasm for the Demons is infectious, and George and Big Man's deep dive into match analysis helps me understand the intricacies of each game, even if I can't watch it live. Listening to the Demonland podcast feels like catching up with an old friend who shares my passion for the red and blue. It's comforting to know that I'm not alone in my support for the Demons, and the podcast serves as a virtual gathering place where fans from around the world can come together and share their love for the club. Demonland is an invaluable lifeline for expats that keeps us connected to our team and our roots. Whether you're in Melbourne or halfway across the globe, Demonland is a must-listen for every D's fan. And what a great review that is, Helena, all the way from Finland. So
dangerous people, the Finns. I've skied with them a couple of times. They drink all day and they ski all day and they drink all night, and then they do the same thing the next day. So
more skiing references.
More skiing,
George.
yeah, absolutely.
Time with a bit of Finnish thrown in, like the
our sister city, Helsinki. Keep that feedback coming. We really appreciate a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. And don't forget to click the write a review link and write the review, as well as clicking on all 5 stars, and we'll read it out on the show. If you follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or Threads, you want to leave us feedback or post a question or a comment for the show, you can post under our podcast post each week or just slide into our DMs. We're not going to read out your full name on the show. That's how Andrew got in touch with us. And also on Facebook, Victoria from Bentley East writes in and says, what a different match. Bit loose at the start, but we certainly kept the pressure up and gave ourselves opportunities to score. Stephen May, a giant down back, and the ball handling skills, a huge improvement on last week. Looking forward to hearing the breakdown of the podcast this week. Great to have a win and still some areas to improve. Thank you, Vic, for that. I hope you enjoy the breakdown this week after a win. I assure you it's so much more fun for us when we win than when we lose. Someone did just try to call in and I just missed it. So if you want to give us a call back, give us a call. I'll get you on. In addition to being available on Apple, Google, Spotify, SoundCloud, and or your preferred podcasting app, the Demonland podcast is available on YouTube to be watched and listened to. Just search for Demonland Podcast to find our channel. If you want to chat with other Demons fans and you've never been to our forum, head on over to demonland.com, sign up and chat with other D's fans from across Australia and around the world. It's completely free. And in addition to being able to post questions or comments for the show, like we've got a whole lot coming up, there's also lots of topics and threads discussing all things Demons related. So join in on the conversation. Caller, I'll get to you in 1 second. If you'd like to join us on the air tonight, we've got a caller on the line right now, and you want to talk about any of the topics we're going to talk about, please give us a call on 03. They hung up. Could have been telemarketing. 03 9016 3666. That's 03 9016 3666. I'll answer. I'll put you on mute and then bring you on when there's a break in the conversation.
You could be angry calling in.
I'm hoping it is, actually, because I want to hear what he has to say. So if that is you, don't make me angry, give us a call. During the week, you can call that number, leave us a message. We've got a couple lined up during the question part of the comments, so we'll listen to those voicemails shortly. Caller is back, and it is Don't Make Me Angry. G'day, Don't Make Me Angry. What have you to say this week? Are you happy? Oh, there, I've got you.
Hello.
Hey, Don't Make Me Angry. How you going?
Oh, this is Enzo. You can't refer to me as Don't Make Me Angry anymore.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Yes. Okay, Enzo.
yes, because you have banned me for sticking up for certain players, and I just want to make I'm a lot more happier this week, of course.
Oh, I imagine you are.
Yeah, and no, it's great. I was feeling too emotional, and it was very bad for me to bring up it straight after a game, and that's probably the worst time to talk about it. But yeah,
you should do the post-match presses instead of Goody, Enzo.
Yeah, what I want to say about Goody's coaching and all that. The thing about it, he's not a good technician in games. I think that's total baloney, because I think, as people might forget, in 2018, how many times the team at half-time were down, and then he would change the way we'd play and we'd come up with that, what was it called? Beast mode. 2018 was the perfect beast mode year where things wouldn't be going well, and then at half time they'd implement the beast mode, which is the running off the half back, which the beast mode was killed after the 666 was brought in. So I don't think the only thing about Goody is his team selection. Sometimes is quite often I'll see team selection, I'll say that's lost. Like with last week, what was disappointing me the most about last week was Billings being made sub. Now, it didn't make sense that you'd bring in an elite kick to fix our problem that people say, our problem is connection of forward 50. So what did they do? They made him sub, and we only had 5 marks inside 50. So what happens the next week, he plays the whole game, and what does he have? 10 score involvements, 15 marks, a couple of goal assists, so he hit up a couple of targets. So, that was the brilliancy. He should never have been made sub, and if he'd played last week, I think the result might have been slightly different. So that's about Woody. And
on that, Enzo, that's another thing that frustrates me. The criticism, the most consistent criticism I've heard of Simon Goodwin is that he's stubborn. And so if he was so stubborn, he would have started Billings as a sub again, but he doesn't. I think that he cops a lot of, I really think that a big issue is that he's just not as engaging in the media as say McRae or, and he doesn't give the media what they want, a big sugar hit all the time. So,
And other stubborn coaches are Ross Lyon and Alistair Clarkson, and they don't give the media anything either. So.
Yeah, exactly. There are a lot of stubborn coaches, and what I also would say is they're all, ultra, what do you call it? Like alphas that, of course it's my way or the highway. They're the senior coach at the elite level of AFL footy. So, they're going to be pretty strong on their opinions, and they're going to be pretty confident that their systems are successful and the ones to go with.
Yeah. Can I say something about Bevo, the Dogs?
Sure.
Yeah. He is the most stubborn coach in the AFL, and I'll give you an example. Last year, Norton was played in the forward line and Bruce was played in the back line. Now, how ridiculous is that? Norton is a natural defender and Bruce is a natural forward, but yet he put him in the total different positions. And I think their season might have been different if Bruce is in the forward line and Norton's in the back line, and he just will not put Norton in the back line because that will transform the Dogs if he went into the back line. But I hope he does keep him in the forward line, because that means the Dogs will never become a good team unless he goes back. But one other thing, I want to hail a couple of players that I will never take. I would never accept this particular player people criticising him, and that's we all got to bow down and hail to a certain meat-eating man called Tom McDonald, who has always given 130% effort to the Melbourne Football Club. And people always criticise about the way he used to kick out of the back line, but I don't think it was a bad kick or a bad body. He always tried to take, what was his wrong is he was a risk taker.
Yeah, no, you're right. That's exactly right. Exactly right, Enzo. He bit off more than he could chew often. Technically was always a good kick. He just would take those corridor kicks on. My heart was in my mouth. I kept expecting him to turn it over. I've still got, I can still remember those turnovers from halfback flank. But yeah, he was fantastic yesterday and looked in pretty good nick too, I thought.
And we're going to talk a bit more about him later on, so we won't talk about him too much now. Anything else, Enzo, before I let you go?
Yeah, so I won't ever hear people going, he should be gone, McDonald, people calling him a campaigner on certain sites. And people should really bow down to him, because without him in 21, there is no Melbourne premiership. So, and I've got to praise Billings. I hope he plays all year. I hope that's not one Swallow making a season. And another thing is, Tom Swallow, he's got the Swallow or the Sparrow. He's got to live. So since he's signed his contract, he's just produced nothing. So I don't know whether that's Oliver coming back in, but he's got to show a bit extra now. But he's still a good player, and All we got at home, of course, Oliver. The criticism of the media is just absolute rubbish, and the criticism of our culture is just absolute rubbish. And I rang up SCN and I complained about how other clubs have done the same sort of things and their culture has never been questioned, and Melbourne has. Collingwood, remember one year they had 11 players tested positive during the pre-season for illicit drugs. So that allegedly. But anyway,
allegedly,
have
yes,
a good night, fellas, and it's not making me angry. Bye-bye.
All right.
And go D's.
All right, Enzo, but please do call in when you are angry. It's good content for the show. Thanks, mate. We'll speak to you soon. That was Enzo. We can't call him "Don't Make Me Angry" anymore.
Or this week.
All right, so let's get into our match overview. The D's secured a decisive victory over the Western Bulldogs in their round one match, winning by 45 points and showcasing a compelling narrative of resurgence, tactical prowess, and some individual brilliance. The comprehensive win marked a significant turnaround for the Demons after their previous week's loss, and despite some early pressure from the Bulldogs, the Demons displayed resilience under the scorching sun at the MCG. And despite the occasional flashes of brilliance from star Bontempelli, the Bulldogs, in effect, struggled to maintain momentum against a resolute D's outfit. In contrast, the Demons displayed a renewed sense of cohesion and efficiency, led by standout performances from key players. Captain Max Gawn dominated the air and the rucks with 9 marks, 8 clearances and 35 hitouts, while our king Clayton Oliver returned to his very best as he exhibited his midfield mastery with a mesmerising performance, earning accolades from fans and the wider AFL world for his impact on the game, racking up 35 disposals, 8 score involvements, 7 inside 50, 6 clearances, 5 marks and 589 metres gained. Melbourne's forward line, often criticised for inconsistency, proved potent, with multiple goal scorers contributing to their impressive tally. Ben Brown's return to form after injury layoff was particularly noteworthy, providing a vital target up the ground and in the 50-metre arc, as well as relieving pressure on young Jacob van Rooyen, who booted 3 goals. Small crumbing forward Kay Chandler found some of his early 2023 form with 3 goals of his own. Defensively, the Demons were formidable, with Stephen May leading the charge alongside returning players like Tom McDonald and Marty Hoare. Their ability to stifle the Bulldogs' forward thrusts underscored Melbourne's defensive solidity. Off-season trade target Jack Billings relished his time on the MCG, racking up 23 disposals, 15 marks, 10 score involvements, 5 tackles and a goal. The D's win provided a much-needed boost of morale for many D's fans following last week's defeat. With key players firing on all cylinders, the Demons have laid down a marker for what can and should be expected going forward in 2024. So, gentlemen, if you have any more brief takeaways from the match, keeping in mind some of the topics we'll be discussing a bit later on, George, followed by Binman.
No, I think we'll cover it all off pretty well during the night. The questions being asked are pretty comprehensive tonight, so
they actually
we'll go straight towards those, I think.
Yeah. The only thing I'd say is sort of really the same as last week. I'm not going to read too much into the win. It was great to get a win, and it really was important to get to go 50-50 after round 2. Just statistically, you talked about it last week, the challenge for teams once they drop to 0-2, Andy. It's really interesting that Brisbane and the Pies both are now 0-2. If we'd been 0-2 as well, that obviously, it's going to make life difficult for us. I wouldn't. For whatever reason, and Beveridge's presser was really interesting. It was one of the more interesting pressers that I've heard in a while. He was super confident that they would run out that game well, and so they didn't. They were gassed in that last quarter. Like, the numbers swung dramatically our way. A lot of the indicators, and I thought they ran out of gas. And my sense is that the heat, they struggled in the heat, whereas it might have well been an advantage for us to have played in the humidity, and we had a good solid block of time, almost 10 days between the Swans game and this game. So I wouldn't write too much, take too much out of the Swans loss, and I wouldn't take too much out of this win in terms of, where we're at. It's going to be a really, really long, they're always long seasons, but the game is just getting increasingly aerobically and physically challenging. So this is going to be a long season.
Before we get into your stats, Bin-Man, the Swans game against Collingwood almost made me feel a little bit better even before our win about our game against Sydney, because I watched them and Sydney were very, very slick. I don't know how much you can read into Collingwood's form yet, but Sydney looks seriously impressive, and I just put into perspective when you add the conditions of the hot and humid conditions and whatever else to our game. Apparently Max was a bit ill, someone said. So
yeah, they were super impressive, and I'll touch on a bit of that game. They do. Some of their kicking was to die for. My wish list at Christmas, Santa, just put Gordon under my tree and I'll drop him off at Goodies Place.
Yeah. All right, B-Man, you want to get into your stats files, and while you do that, I've just got to leave the room for 2 seconds, so you just keep going. I'll be back.
No worries. So as listeners know, there's sort of the stats, the fundamental stats, and I won't get into this now because there's a question about this, but I talked last week about our changed method, our high handball, and it's really interesting in terms of the impact that's had on, what's good stats for us, what's bad stats for us. So, last year it was easy. It was time in forward half, contested possessions, scores from turnover. It didn't really matter what our scores from stoppages were. Those were the key numbers. And as I've mentioned lots of times at quarter time when they show the players the board, those were the numbers on the board. And so I was fascinated this week. Only one of those numbers, maybe two, were on there. Contested possession was way down the board. Time in forward half was up the top, but there were other information that they were showing the players. And I think it's reflected in a different game plan that we're running with. Again, as I talked a couple of weeks ago, my theory is that basically teams, in order to be able to get through to finals, essentially there's going to be two game plans, one for the home and away, or particularly one for the first half of the home and away season and one for the latter half of the home and away season into the finals. It's fascinating to hear Goodies Presser talk about how different the first handful of games are in the season, hence his strategy around the marking. So, it's a really bit of influx. It's going to take me a little while to sort of get a handle on what good stats are, what bad stats are, I think, and what represents sort of. So lots of good stats, not so many bad stats today, but lots of curious things. Number one stat for me that was great, and of course this is padded out by the number of short kicks. Our kicking efficiency was 72.4%, which is really, really good for us. Yes, that was padded out a lot by kicks, but Beveridge made the point in his presser that one of the things that disrupted the way the Dogs played and they struggled to cope with, and he sort of implied that he was unhappy with how his players responded to this. He made the point that a lot of our short kicks weren't switching. They weren't going side to side sort of dead kicks. They were going forward. And that was a really noticeable sort of aspect of the game. A lot of short leads, but they were kicking the ball towards our goal, not sort of wasting time kicking back and side to side. In fact, it was the Dogs who wasted a lot of energy kicking back from side to side. We had 10 more intercepts than them, 5 more intercept marks. That's, the game is all about turnovers these days, though there's an interesting stat around stoppages. Plus 11 for hit-outs, plus 7 for hit-outs for advantage, plus 10 for tackles. That was massive. Plus 3 for tackles inside 50. So we had 7 this week, which was impressive. Really fascinating number. Sort of what I was saying, we came to play in terms of our stoppages. We were plus 22 for stoppages. Keeping in mind, we regularly lost that stat last year. I'd say 70% of games that we played last year, the opposition scored more from us than stoppages. We scored the other big number, so 22 plus 22 from stoppages. We were plus 20 from turnovers. So massive. That's really the 42. That's the difference right there in terms of the ultimate margin, which was 41. I think huge thing for me, like I was so pleased I was watching this, I thought our fitness looked fantastic, and that was evidenced by the way we ran out the game. And again, last week, we sort of struggled in that last quarter, evidently, and that was reflected in our pressures numbers that fell through the floor in that last quarter. I think from memory it was 159 in the last quarter. 180 is considered average. So for the match it was 172 to 162. The pressure rating points, remember 200's elite. In the third quarter we really ramped it out after we came out at halftime and put the game to rest, really, and you could see it. The eyes told the tale. It was 195 to 162 plus 33 pressure points in that game. What's interesting about those numbers is it feels a little bit low, but as we talked about last year with the pressure numbers, they're very influenced by the model. So less contested possessions, less sort of contests, and more of those kickings and high marking games. By definition, you'll get less pressure points. But we finished out the match quite well, 167. Reflecting what a caution on not reading too much into this game, the Dogs fell in a hole pressure-wise, could only manage 155 in that last quarter. So they really struggled, and again, Beveridge noted that. He had a real note of surprise in his voice because he expected them to run out that game well and said as much. Our top five pressure players, number one was Jack Viney. Number two was Billings, who was just fantastic. Jack Viney had 30 individual presser acts. That second, Billings had 21. What a game by Viney in terms of that pressure. 𝗍𝗲𝗁𝗀𝗁 had number three. Kay Chandler, who had a great game. I was really pleased to see that. He really needs to be that crumbing forward to 𝗟𝗻𝗀𝗀𝗀, and he went a long way to 𝗟𝗻𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 spot this week, I thought. Christian Shalem was the next one who also had an excellent game, and it was fantastic to see him in the middle. I think it was, speaking of Goody, if he, sticks to his systems, there was no thought. I never had a single thought in my mind that he was going to go back and that he wouldn't continue on playing Salo in the middle, and that's exactly what happened. You mentioned 𝗍𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀, so in the good category, you mentioned 𝗍𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀, he had a good game, and he had 607 metres gained, the most of any player on the ground, which is just awesome, and reflective of a really, playing a much more aggressive role, higher up the ground, and there's a question about Lever later, but I think his Lever helped him play that role, and how was that free kick? I can't believe they gave him a free kick, but when he ran through those two doggies on the it must have been right in front of you, George. That was just awesome to watch. He looks in good nick, doesn't he? He looks, he looks like he's moving well, and he kicked well too, I thought. So, a great game from 𝗍𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀. Of Clary's 35 possessions, 26 were uncontested, and I've put this in the good category because I really like that. Like he's got such great vision. Technically, he's not the best kick, but he was great yesterday, and he hit some beautiful kicks. And I really like if he's getting more uncontested ball, because one of the things that stood out for me yesterday is just I can't recall seeing a more natural footballer than in terms of his footy IQ. His footy IQ is through the roof, and I just was loving watching him play. But I'm really pleased that so many of his possessions were uncontested. You mentioned Jack Billings. Only once has he had more than 20 kicks in his career, so that was almost a career high. The last time he had more than 10 score involvements was back in 21, so a huge game for him, fantastic performance. In that last quarter, we generated 11 scores from 13 inside 50s. That's just nuts. Partly, though, I would caution not to get too overjoyed with it, in the sense that it really probably reflects the Dogs hitting the wall and, their pressure dropping off. And it just shows, you saw that in the Pies game. They could not apply pressure. They could not run. They were completely gassed in that second half, the Pies. You could see in this game, the impact of when teams get gassed. In that Pies game, by the way, the Pies gave up something like 8-9 goals in red time, which speaks to a team that's, for whatever reason, not yet fit. We were more efficient yesterday with 27 to 18 effective clearances, but the key thing is we converted those clearances 47 to 21 points, as I mentioned before, plus 26 for stoppages. It was a bit difficult to find bad stats, but we were, after being up in ground ball gets last week, which was a bit of a strange anomaly given how well the Swans do in that space, we were down 13 ground ball gets in this game, which I would never have guessed without looking at the stats. Just while I think of it, shout out to Wheelo Ratings for most of these numbers. That's so it really helps me look at the game, especially since I'm not listening to footy media so far this year, except for First Crack. The only other bad really I could pick out was Fritter's form. Only 7 disposals. His kicking was off again. Only kicked 3 points, goals that he'd normally kick. His body language.
Had he kicked straight, we would have been maybe saying a different thing. But yeah.
Well, yeah, his body language looks a bit off. He looks a bit down on himself. I'm not sure whether maybe I'm overreading it, but 7 disposals. I read on Demonland. Sorry, George.
He wasn't chasing was the other thing. Really, really wasn't chasing. And he looked like a guy, I said he looked like a guy who played at Coldstream and Casey in the winter. Wasn't coping well with the hot weather, but he was miles off. And normally his set shot kicking is, pretty accurate, but he wasn't even close. It was just...
Especially that one in the middle, like the one in the middle channel that he had was, and someone said, I wrote, which is probably a reasonable comment, I read on Demonland somewhere that maybe he did some defensive work and it reduced the impact of Liam Jones, but it feels like a bit of a stretch for that. And so that concerns me a little bit. The positive, of course, is if he turns it around and it gets his radar back on. But really, it's less the 3 points that worries me. It's more the 7 disposals. And as you say, that sort of... so that's interesting. So for Curious, this goes again to this discussion. So all of these numbers I'm about to say, most of them really reflect that this sort of, we've got at the moment a changed game plan, quite a radically changed game plan. I'm really surprised that there's not more discussion about this because it represents a fundamental change to the way we're playing, except for one thing, is our defensive system is still exactly the same. So we've got a new way, like a different way of transitioning it. It's interesting time. Enzo mentioned 2018. People tend to forget how aggressive our ball movement was in 2018. Yes, we got opened up by the best teams on defence, but we were smashing teams below us because we were moving the ball so aggressively back then. So contested possessions, we regularly won this last season by 20 or 30. And it was basically if we win that by more than 15, we don't ever lose. The contested possessions were dead even. And at three-quarter time, I think from memory, the Dogs were well up. It was just that last quarter the Dogs really fell at a bit of a heap. So that's really un-Melbourne-like in the method that we employed for the last 2 seasons. Similarly, inside 50s were 53 all. And at one point, they were well in the Dogs' favour. Again, they're really strange numbers for a Goodwin-coached team in 21, 22 and 23. The same goes for time in forward half. This was striking. So for the match, it was 47 our way, 53 their way, which is totally different to what it would normally look like. And at one point I looked up, it was on the scoreboard, 20 minutes into the third quarter, it was 60% time in forward half for the Dogs, 40% our way, which... if you look at all of those numbers together, it ended up being 46-54, but that's only because, again, in that last quarter, the Dogs stopped to a walk. I reckon, I don't think there would be a time that late in the game, 60-40, in the last 3 seasons. I don't think once we would have seen a disparity for time in forward half like that. I'd be really confident to say is that I doubt that we've ever been 40-60 that late in a game. And if we were at any point in 21, 22, 23, if we were level for contested possessions, down on time in forward half and level on inside 50s, we'd be losing that game by 5 or 6 goals, no probs. But with this way we're playing at the moment, the stats are scores from turnover, and so curiously, we scored a lot of our scores from the wing forward. So we scored 62 points. Our scoring chain, 62 of our points that we scored, so well over half, they started on the wing. That's where the scoring chain started. So Billings and Windsor and Langers and May. That's where May was doing a lot of his damage, and even Lever when he got up the ground. So that's remarkable. They only scored 25 of their points from the wing zone. We scored 26 from forward half, 50. That's where we generated the scoring chain started from, and they could only score 13. So that was really interesting, and it just, keep a watch on it, really reflects a different game plan. They're radically different numbers. Like, they're so different to last year that it's like chalk and cheese. on Demonland in the stats file thread, which for people who don't know Demonland, there's a thread called stats file. Anyone who's interested in data and stats, Demon Dynasty writes some really excellent stuff on ratings, players' ratings and team ratings, and Willow Ratings puts his data up. It's fantastic if you're interested in stats. From go to Woden, which is a great poster's name. Say that one quickly. He noticed in the stats file something that I'd missed that I thought was fascinating, that Sparrow had 0 centre bounce attendances, which was really, really curious. I can't imagine he's carrying anything, because otherwise surely he would have been the one that was subbed off, and his time on ground was 77%, ahead of similar players like 𝗟𝗍𝗍𝗯𝗍, 𝗦cie and 𝗟𝗍𝗯𝗀𝗃. So they clearly weren't managing him. Any thoughts on that, George?
Not really. I think in this game we really just went head to head with the Bulldogs. Our best mids played head to head with theirs for virtually the whole game. They were the same.
Yeah.
I'll talk about it later, but I think their mids were actually mismanaged more than ours, and that's why they fell away in the last quarter.
Yeah.
But it was always Treloar, Liberatore and Bontempelli, and not much else. And when you've got those three in there, which also probably explains the number of inside 50s that they had, you've got to match them with the same sort of quality. And we kept but we also rotated as well, getting 𝗟𝗍𝗍 in there. But you had Oliver. Oliver wasn't on for the first 5 or 6 minutes of the game, for example. Petrarca was in there.
But that was it. So no one else went in there. So it was, and I don't reckon, again, speaking of things that haven't happened before, I very much doubt, or at least in the last 2 seasons, that Sparrow, when he's played at least 77%, in that normal range, is that he's not had a single centre bounce attendance. So that definitely was curious. Here's a fantastic curious score for the true believers. Our expected score was 83.3, so we were plus 23.7 above our expected score. I mean, that just makes for beautiful reading. I want to see that every single week.
It just proves the statistics are rubbish that are going into it.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't at all. It doesn't at all. And it was because where the numbers were from, it was predominantly from general play, so not from set shots, which were about level. So we got it was where we were above average, plus 19 from our shots when the ball was in motion in general play, 2 of which were my boy Nibbler, the banana dribbler. That's exactly an example. That kick, couldn't believe how sort of, I watched the replay, how sort of unexcited the commentators were about that. That was a brilliant kick by Nibbler to kick that goal. I'm talking about it as if he was shelling peas. I mean, that, and also his banana kick when he played on. Like, they are high. They're 2 in 10 kicks. So you get them. That's where you get your expected score. So that was a great stat. Halftime, just quickly, some other curious ones. Halftime, Western Bulldogs, the Doggies led forward 50 marks, 8-3. Forward 50 disposals. They doubled their forward 50. They had 30 forward 50 disposals to our 15, but only, from all of that work, only generated 2 shots at goals from within 30 metres compared to 7 for us. And that was because we were running it by hands and getting it deep. Nibbler got one of those goals, and so it got 2 of those goals, and we had a couple where we ran into the goal square, including Brownie and others. So that was really interesting defensively, despite trailing 12 to 24 in forward half intercepts. So that was crazy. So they doubled, this is at halftime, they doubled our forward half intercepts. We scored more points from this. We scored 30 to 26, which is ridiculous. Given they just could not take advantage of when they turned the ball over in the forward half. And that's because of our defensive system. Our defensive system was so well set up that they were completely flummoxed. This was a curious number I saw. Van Ruins kicked 92.1% of his goals in his career thus far from set shots. That was last year, I should say, which was the highest percentage of the top 50 goal kickers in the AFL. And again, 2 of his 3 goals yesterday were from set shots. Beautiful kick for goal, terrific. The most marks that we talked about, most marks that the D's have taken in a game under 𝗟𝗍𝗀𝗀𝗀, it's 133, and that was in his second game as coach way back in 2017. We took 141 marks yesterday, and we had obviously a clear intent right from the get-go to maintain possession. But as I noted before, and as Beveridge noted in his presser, a real sort of feature of that is that we were kicking forward, not going side to side and just, sort of easy padding kicks from left and right. Though we did do a bit of switching, and we really, as Goody said in his presser, we really looked to stretch the MCG, and that was really noticeable. And I think that went a long way to blowing up the Dogs in that last quarter, the way we played. And as I talked about, Beveridge really didn't have a sort of tactical response, and he indicated he was disappointed in his players' inability, I presume, to work across to stop those little leads and passes. And statistically, from a statistical point of view, just a fascinating day, and I think we're going to see some of this in the next few weeks. So, fans should get used to a different way of transitioning the ball, same defensive system.
I know people don't want to hear this, but it's what we're playing and executed in this game was what Collingwood did last year for the most. They don't go sideways. They look for the short kicks, get it into the hands of the good ball users, move it quickly, move it straight ahead. That's the way that we're playing this year as well. And it's always been the trend. Once a team gets to be premiers, everybody else tries to copy them, and I don't think we're copying, and we just didn't execute. Collingwood, perhaps look at the other way around. They were last year playing the way that we play. Yeah. We didn't have the players to execute, but the successful teams are playing that way. And like I said last week in the pre-season stuff, the switch as we know it is dead. It's players are too well trained, too fit these days. They cut it off. I was watching Essendon Hawthorn. It was just awful to watch. You could see things stopping before they'd even executed the first kick.
And it's so much so now, George. But like watching the game now, watching the D's play, when the opposition switch, like the Dogs did a few times, just out of frustration, and you're almost relieved because our team is so good at washing across the ground that it's almost a chop out for them.
They
can regather their energy and.
You just say to yourself, "Oh, this is going nowhere" before it's even started.
Exactly. The one thing I agree with you that there's a real similarity, but this way we're playing it's inspired by the Pies, but there's a big difference, I think, which is the use of the handball. But I'll talk to that later. And but I think you're right. That's exactly right. Like fast ball movement, is obviously the way to defeat zones. So.
Well, we do have a caller on the line. Who am I talking to?
Yeah, this is Noah from Brighton.
Hi, Noah. How are you going?
Very good. Thanks very much for taking my call. I just wanted to say that I was really impressed with how Melbourne played this week after the Sydney game. I'm really excited with this new way that they're playing, and I think it's very different to the last couple of years. I just wanted to know everyone's opinion on whether they think we're going to be able to continue this way of playing, all year with, the level of fitness required and stamina that's required with the fast ball game. I was really impressed with McDonald and Brown, how they played this week. I think T-Mac did really well in the defence, and Ben Brown was a great contributor. Just wanted to know your opinion. And finally, with the proposition for us to be at Caulfield Racecourse, just wanted to know your thoughts, whether you think it's realistically going to happen, and is it going to have a social club where we can have a few drinks and celebrate? Love the podcast, guys.
Thanks, Noah. Appreciate that. We're going to talk about T-Mac and Ben Brown a bit later on, so we'll leave that for the moment. In terms of fitness, B-Man, can we keep it up? There's no reason why we shouldn't be able to, barring mass injuries.
Well, it's fascinating. It's really, really fascinating. I mean, for listeners new to the Demonland podcast, I've been talking about this for a couple of years, but outside of injury, which I think is the biggest determinant of a chance for a flag, obviously you've got to have the list and the system and all of those things, but leaving that aside, if you get the wrong injuries at the wrong time, you're not going to win a flag. And I think we saw that last year with the sort of devastating injuries that we had to our forward line. But the other key factor is fitness. And I think it consistently gets underrated by the media, the importance of it. And, just for instance, take the conversation about where Collingwood are at. It's clear to me that they're not fit. Now, Fagan was really interesting. He came out and clearly said that they plan, because they've got the bye this week, that their plan that was to load and to risk losing these 2 games and have their season almost begin from after the bye. And so the fitness question is a really fascinating one, particularly for the clubs that had played in that opening round, because they all get a bye at some point, is how they use that bye period to sort of finesse their loading management program and the tapering into them. And then afterwards, I was really concerned that maybe we were doing something. Remember 2 or 3 weeks ago, I put out there after that Richmond practice game that I was cute. We didn't seem to be running that game out. That's why I was so pleased how well we ran out this game, because early wins in the season are critical. It's a huge risk. Fascinating that Fagan said it. I listened to the radio yesterday at the Footy National Indigenous Radio Service. It was fantastic. And Chris Johnson was on it, and he was asked about Collingwood, and he said exactly that. He said, look, he hasn't spoken to anyone at Collingwood, but his assumption is, just from watching them, is that they're in a heavy training phase, and that you could see that they weren't running out. You can't run it out. You can't do that all-team defence, and you get cut up by any team. So it is the $64,000 question. I think, are we going to be fit enough? Who knows? I used the analogy last year. It's putting a cake in the oven, and you don't know until it comes out whether it's worked. And, it's a science, but it's a pretty complicated one. Many would say it's an art, I'm guessing. So who knows? Injuries will play a big role, and, getting the program right. One huge positive is our middle of the year bye this year. We don't have those stupid 9-day breaks. We've got after this first bye, we've got a full 2-week break, and then after our middle bye, we've got a proper 2-week break. So that should go a long way to help us be in a good shape come finals, I think.
Just to answer the last question from Noah, social clubs are dead. They were leftovers from the 1960s. Nobody has a social club these days, and it would never ever. Well, to give you an example, at Amy Park, there's a cafe there that we were offered when we first took up the contract. They had a look at it from a business perspective. It was never going to make any money. There just isn't the traffic, and the last place you'll get any traffic is in the middle of Caulfield Racecourse. You've got to operate these things all week to make money out of them. There is no point. Why would people go to Caulfield? It's a training ground. That's all it's designed to be. If you want the social aspects after the game at the MCG.
Or online.
Yeah, or online.
All right, Noah, I'm hoping that answers your question. We do have another caller on the line. Welcome to the Demonland podcast. Who am I talking to? Oh, get you.
My name's Damo.
Damo, is it you that's asked a couple of questions we've got coming up tonight?
Yes,
Okay.
I have asked
Fantastic.
a couple of questions.
Fantastic. Well, what can we do for you now?
Well, I'm really happy with how the Demons played. I thought that that Footscray were really quite shoddy, which they might come back or might not. But there were a few things that the Swans did that looked like what we had been trying to achieve, and some of them, and I put a couple of mentions in there about some of the things that they do, like knocking on.
Well, one sec, Damo. Bring this one up now, because I wasn't going to put that one in tonight's thing. So if you want to talk about the tactics, the one about Lever I've got and we'll talk about. But if you want to talk about Sydney's tactics now, you can ask Binman and George about that. So go for it.
All right, am I on?
Yes, yeah. No, you are on. So if you want to talk about the Sydney tactics.
Sorry, I turned the radio off.
No, that's all right.
Yeah.
This isn't 3AW. You're straight on the air.
Yeah. G'day, everyone. And I really like the podcast. I thought we played really well, and it was like what I'd been reading from all the reviews on training, especially Kev Martin's, and how kicking the ball low and not trying to kick too far and not trying to kick too high when just to play a little bit with Kev Martin. But look, when you pick someone out to kick to, you always have a better. I really think that if you're a reasonable kick, if you've got a target, and that's one of the things I liked about Laurie, actually. He always looked up for a target, and it was one of the things that I was critical about 𝗟𝗏 last year because he seemed happy to kick it over his shoulder or not really look up, but he hit every target on the weekend. He was fantastic.
He was great.
And I really like Jake Lever, and I think he's pretty good, but I've noticed him at the footy, and he's reasonably critical of other players, and he just seems to kick to an area of the ground. And as someone else said, it's like a rainbow. It goes up high and long, and it comes back in pretty hard. But having said that, I watched the 15-minute review on 𝗪𝗀 today, and I saw that he was in one of the best passages, dropped his eyes down, hit track on the chest, and it ended up going down for a goal. But that was the thing about Jake, that I think that he needs to lower his eyes a bit. The only other thing I want to say is how good are the Swans? Until we play someone who we can see are really good at the moment, I mean, I don't think Collingwood and the Bears and Brisbane are really good right now, but the Swans are. And one of the things I really liked was when they're in congestion, rather than trying to, and the ball's up high and you're going to be tackled, and ANB in particular grabs it, goes and tries to drop down and feed it out, but he gets caught and he's happy for a ball up. But they were tapping it to the outside a lot, and I wonder if anyone else noticed.
B-Man, you want to take that one?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I did notice that, but one of the interesting things is that's what we were trying to do in the Sydney game when we played them. That model is what we were doing in that Richmond practice game and also the Blues game, and we implemented a similar model in this game. The difference was it felt like a bit of a hybrid where it was that same sort of chaotic handballing that Sydney were doing against seemingly chaotic. It's strategic. It wasn't, chaotic in the sense that it was unplanned. They clearly have got a model of tapping it forward at all costs, lots of underground handballs, bouncing them up, get it forward, make sure you get territory. That's what I was talking about before, is that we're doing it. The Swans are doing it, Tigers are doing it, and it's a bit what George's point about the pies model is, that it feels like to me that that's the new version of it. It's all still about going fast, it's still getting the ball forward, but it's sort of partly, I think, designed to break down the pies strategy. What the Swans did brilliantly is they allowed the ball to go out the back to 𝗪𝗀. He had 37 possessions, and most of them were just useless possessions because they focused on the next kick. The next ball after 𝗪𝗀 got the ball was where they focused their energy. But otherwise they were looking that sort of tapping it forward, handballing it, not worrying too much if they lost the ball. And that's what Melbourne fans are going to have to get used to. We're going to turn the ball over a lot. We're going to accept that we turn the ball over and hope that we win it back after we turn it over, because lots of those little handball chains, the chains are going to break. And that Sydney lost a lot of those, turned it over a lot. It's just that Collingwood couldn't hurt them on the turnover and they won it back. So I really think that there's a number of teams playing a very similar model, Swans being one of them. And a lot of the frustration in that first game that we played against the Swans was our ball handling, but a lot of that was to do, we were trying a new model. I think people have to be patient with Melbourne because, implementing a new way of playing as radical as this, even if we do have our defensive system, still in place, it takes a lot of work. And it's interesting you mentioned Kev Martin, Damo, because George and Andy and others who have regularly been to training have really noticed the emphasis on those training drills where they're in close and lots of handballs and lots of those, where they do it in a square and have to get it from one side to the other. So, you can't arrive at a method like this without doing hundreds of hours pre-season practice. So teams like Pies, who I don't think have been doing it, can't suddenly magic it up and produce it, because one of the notable things about the Swans is how many times they handball blind to a Swans player. And that doesn't, as I say, doesn't happen by magic. That's just hours and hours, hundreds of hours of practice.
Yeah, well, I mean, because he kicked a goal where he wasn't looking at the goals at all. But so, yeah, and I should say that when we played the Swans, I disregard that game just because of the conditions. And they're probably a bit more used to them. Like you were saying about Fritter before, he'd probably do better in -5 than he did in the heat on the other day. But I'm really encouraged by Billings and everyone lowering their eyes and hitting and looking up for a target. Like the whole idea of, and I mean, it's AFL, you don't have a lot of time, but looking up and looking for a target, and I see that in Laurie as well. I know he hasn't done too well, but I have hopes for him.
But I guess the key is you've got to have the sorry, Damo. The thing about the Swans is they've got so many good kicks. For that model to work, you have to have players who can hit that target. Like if you've got too many players who turnover is so critical now, which is why if you've got a whole bunch of butchers, you're better to kick at 60 metres than 20 metres. But just the one thing for Damo, I'll answer that now, Andy, on Lever. It's interesting. There were a few comments about Lever's game. I thought he had a terrific game. He had 8 score involvements. Only Maxi, Billings and Track had more, which really speaks to how critical his role. I mentioned before our scores from the back half, and which was a really impressive part of the way we played. He was key to that, but also his game freed up. Maisie doesn't have 608 metres gained without the role that Lever played. And he also had 17 disposals. So, and the thing, we won't talk about it now, but the question about Tomlinson coming out is partly answered by how flexible Lever is. He was playing at different times on lob. He picked up Norton. He was on Waitman at one point. He was on 𝗟𝗲𝗄𝗃. He was part of a group effort that really made life difficult for the Dogs to score. I thought his game was terrific, and as I say, he was really key to how well we transitioned from the back half. And as to his voice, I love it.
I think he's pretty good too. But I think he could just add a couple more things to his bow. If you I'm sure. Watch it again, he does. He knows that he's either got to bomb it long down the line or try to go backwards to one side, and that's most of the time. But I think he's terrific, and I loved it when he came. I loved the reasons he came to Melbourne. I think back quite often to when after he did his knee, and you saw him going through extreme bloody training things, trying to get ready to play as soon as he could when he was 22. And I just think that, he's part of our team ethic, and he's great. But it's just, it's the long bombs down the line that don't come back if he's got no one to cross to,
except
back on his backwards.
The thing though, Damo, I reckon a lot of players get caught for things when they're following team rules. Like we don't always know that the rule is if you haven't got to get it down the ground is to not turnover so critical. He's a halfback flanker. You turn it over on your halfback flank, you're gifting them a goal. When in doubt, kick at 60 metres is clearly a team rule, and Rivers does the same. If you haven't got a good option, and technically he's not a great kick, he probably hasn't got the green light to take on a risky kick to the corridor. And he's the sort of leader and player in our team that would follow the team rules to the letter, I reckon.
Yeah, agreed. Anyway, thanks, guys, for allowing me to talk, and good to chat to you.
No problem.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening. Appreciate it, and your questions that you ask. Let's get into our listeners' questions. An hour and 15 minutes into the show. What asks, how much of a difference do you think having a game under the belt made? 𝗟𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀 responds saying, great question. I'm thrilled with the win, but reluctant to read too much into it at this stage, a touch of MFC SS perhaps. I think round 0 versus the Swans handed us a considerable advantage, as evidenced by Footscray's last quarter fade out, and in my opinion, their lack of pressure, especially in the second half. Love the pod, guys. Thanks. Well, George, do you think that having a game under our belt to shake off the rust benefited us?
Under the belt is another one of these old wives' tales that I hate.
Game under the belt, shake off the rust. It's all
lower the eyes, long bomb. it didn't do Collingwood and it didn't do Brisbane any good for this week, did it? So there's
they're very rusty.
They're very rusty. We've got sports scientists, we've got conditioning coaches, we've got every fitness person known to man. Gone are the old days when football started in April and the pre-season started in the middle of March, when a game under the belt has been used, was advantageous because people actually got fit. That's not the case today. So, as I said, it didn't do Collingwood any good, didn't do Brisbane any good. And what I learned from this week, though, was our coaches did learn the learnings from last week. They were so much better managed, the players in particular. The time on ground in hot conditions, they were very hot conditions, was managed far better than what it was in Sydney. I think Beveridge and the Bulldogs can blame all the people all they like. They really stuffed up in that last quarter. Bontempelli played 88% of the game, and except that both him and English came off the ground after about 5 minutes in the last quarter, and were off for about 10 minutes. Melbourne kicked 6 goals in the last quarter. We had already taken Max off. He'd had a break, came back on when English and Bontempelli were off the field. We brought Gawn and Oliver back on, and guess what happened? The management of the players in those conditions was far, far better this week. The other thing was the selection of the players. We had the right players in the right structures, and this was very important, that we didn't have last week. So the addition of Tom McDonald really showed up. We'll talk about this later on, how important someone is in a zone defence system who understands how to play a zone defence system. So he really stood out. Ben Brown, again, up forward, was the right person in the right structures. I can't remember the last time, it's probably the last 2 years, where we've had small forwards kicking so many goals, and it's because Ben Brown was there competing, not only kicking goals himself, but creating the opportunities for the people like the Chandlers, people like 𝗍𝗲 Pickett, people like Neil Bullen. The ball was hitting the ground and we had the smalls getting it. Almost the last 2 years, it's been JVR and Fredder up forward, trying to do it all on their own. Just the addition of that one additional player has just filled the structures so much better than what we've experienced in the last 2 years, certainly.
But the other factor,
I noticed you didn't use the term "bring the ball to ground."
That's
well, the other big factor, though, in bringing Chandler and 𝗍𝗲 and others into Crumming, and even JVR got one of his goals from a nice crumb from a pack, was the method that we were using meant that the time in forward half, if you get that closer to 50-50, that's what we talked a fair bit about last year. When you're getting 60% of the time in forward half, you're almost, a big chunk of that time, there's 20, 30 players inside the forward 50. And so there's just crazy congestion. It makes it very hard for the crummers. But when you're moving it fast off half-back flank, when you're making a concerted effort to stretch the ground and make it hard for the opposition zone defence to flood back or get set, you're going into a uncrowded or less crowded forward line, and then there's more space for those small forwards to go to work. And I thought that was really noticeable. And interestingly, I think that was a factor in why players like Waitman, conversely struggled to take advantage of their time in forward half, because so often they were going into a crowded, that when they were 60% at three quarters into the game, time in forward half, they had the same problem we often did last year, which is their forward line was packed with players. So, not much space to mark and not much space for the small forwards to go to work. So, really interesting from that perspective in terms of how different it was from a sort of 23 Melbourne look.
About our slow starts, in reference to another poster's comments about sloppy disposal early in the game, Monocular says, if you're referring to the first few minutes, there was actually very little sloppy disposal early in the game by the time 𝗪𝗡ₚ had put 2 goals, 1 on the board, because at that stage we had exactly 1 handball and 0 kicks. Couldn't believe it could happen. Almost looked like our famous bang, bang, bang. My MFC SS kicked in hard, but fortunately we finally switched on and had a fantastic win. How can a team with a gun ruck and gun midfield allow 2 goals run, 2-1 before our first kick. Were they just enjoying the glorious sunshine? B-Man, were you worried in the early stages of the match when the Bulldogs had amassed 19 disposals to our 1 disposal and had booted 2 goals?
No, not really. I mean, it happens, doesn't it? Team gets momentum. Yeah. I mean, that's probably a statistical outlier, 19-1. But no, I mean, what I felt really was that first mark by Norton, who was tracking him. He was It was on him in that stage, and he floated in. And with 3, my concern coming in was I was actually happy with the selections. I thought they were good selections. I thought Hall was a really good selection, a no-brainer. Happy for Tomo as well. For T-Mac to come in. We'll talk about that later. But my one concern with that is 3 new defenders. Might take a little while to get the synergy right, but it speaks to the strength of the defensive system that Goodwin's created, that you could have, almost half of your defensive unit change and still know, that was my only thought. So that happens all the time. I mean, it happens all the time where one team gets a run on. I actually thought it was great. We balanced up. Sometimes some goals are worth more than others, and 𝗦ici's goal was worth its weight in gold because it's really the net. I was worried if they got, in fact, I said it at the ground to my mate, if they get the next goal, suddenly you get to that funny 3-goal margin, and it can be difficult to claw that back. So it was worth its weight in gold, that kick from 𝗦ici, who I said to my mate that at the footy was his kicking has improved probably more than any other player I can recall at Demons in terms of the depth of his kicking, and that's on the back of 2 pre-seasons where he's finally been able to train in footy boots and has had 2 full pre-seasons, but his kicking has been terrific. So no, the answer is I wasn't particularly worried. I would have been worried if after 5 more minutes it was 38-2 or something in possessions, but...
on the King Clary's return, or return to form. He hasn't really gone anywhere. Dad did play in finals last year. Bigfoot says, welcome back to the MCG, King Clary. How good was that standing ovation that he received? I legit had tears welling in my eyes. Love that he did the team thing and passed the ball off, but I so wanted him to have a ping at goal. It would have brought the stands down. Loved Clary. The Ox adds, no question here, just saying that there was a lot hanging on the game, a lot of built-up emotion, hope and expectation. As a club, we really had to come out and make a statement, and I think we did. And Oliver's standing ovation and the emotion that went with it really says everything about what supporters and the club have been through in this last period of time. Thanks. 3183D has left a voicemail on a number of topics, of which we're going to cover tonight anyway, but here at the end of what he has to say is some thoughts on Clary, what we're currently talking about.
Hi, Demonlanders. It's 3183D here, calling from the Badlands of Balaclava. Just got back from the game against the Doggies. Just wanted to leave a few thoughts on that. I thought it was a really good game across the board. Distribution was a lot better than last year. I know it's just a small sample size, but it was markedly different. I thought T-Mac and Big Benny Brown exceeded expectations. I wasn't sure at all about them when I saw their names on the team list, but they both performed much better than I expected and really added a lot of value to the team forward and back. I thought Billings and 𝗍𝗲 were very, very good. 𝗍𝗲 with some great pressure, and Billings actually with some good tackle pressure and some really nice forward 50 entries. Max was a colossus this week. I heard someone near me was saying that he was actually ill last week in Sydney. I'm not sure if that was true or not, but he was fantastic. And then lastly, Clary was absolutely immense. Really, I felt like he played a lot more defensively, a lot more back this week, more than last year, from what I could tell. And he was really fantastic getting stuck in there. Also, that kick to JVR in the last couple of minutes was a real statement of selflessness when he could have had a shot legitimately, but he just dinked it to JVR and got the good ovation from the members as he went off after JVR converted. So all in all, a small sample size, but after last week's showing, much more improved and some reasons for optimism for this season. Thanks, boys. Keep up the great work. Speak soon. Bye.
So 2 pieces of Clary play that stuck out for me. The first was in the second quarter when Clary was in a head-on, one-on-one contest, and he just got there first, collected the ball, made body contact with his opponent, importantly kept his feet, and he got the ball out, as only 𝗟𝗏 can do, to 𝗏𝗏, who dribbled the ball through for a goal, an excellent goal. That was
He looks a bit bigger, I reckon, than he did sort of this time last year. And I think he used every one of those extra kilos in that bump because it was a fantastic bit of play.
The best bit was the keeping the feet, because some players would have gone to ground. The second play that stuck out for me was the play just before he went off the ground to a resounding standing ovation. 𝗟𝗏 was absolutely in his rights to have a pinger goal, especially at that late stage of the game. No one would have begrudged him. He could have sprayed it out on the full and no one would have batted an eyelid. If he nails it, it absolutely would have brought the house down, but he did the unselfish thing, the team thing, and pinpoints the pass to JVR for his third goal for the match. I bloody love the guy. 35 disposals, 8 score involvements, 7 inside 50s, 6 clearances, 5 marks, 589 metres gains. The 4-time Bluey winner, King 𝗟𝗏, has returned. George, did you get a little bit emotional when 𝗟𝗏 came off the ground, and what did you think of his game overall?
Second 30-plus possession disposals game. You've got to admire that in any case for someone who's been on the sidelines for quite a while. I think there are a couple of things to look at in there's not just how brutal he was, particularly that bump where he pushed the Dogs player off before he delivered it to 𝗏𝗏. That's what we all admire as fans. But what really impressed me was the second one with the kick to JVR. We spoke about it last week. We suspect that there are certain KPIs he has to meet, certain instructions he has to follow, certain orders that the team expects him to do that he has to. And I think that was an example of one of them. That in that circumstance, I think 𝗟𝗏 would have taken the kick for goal. But no, we want you to be playing in a certain way, in a certain style, and that's exactly what he did. And look at the response when he came off the ground. The other interesting little snippet was if you have a look at the video on the club site where Billings is being interviewed after the match, 𝗟𝗏's in the background, and there's young kids coming up to him and asking for autographs and things like that. I don't know that he would have done that so much in the past. He just looked like someone who's completely changed his focus, which is perhaps what we've all been looking for. But I'd invite you to go and have a look at that. You know, he's taken the time out to bend down, talk to these kids, sign their autographs for them, take photos with fans. It's all about engagement again.
I've heard he's always been
He's always been great with kids.
That thing, yeah. But it is fantastic to see.
Yeah. And I reckon he has always been great with kids. And I reckon part of that is because kids don't judge him. I'm still a bit undecided about the post-match interview. What was with Sarah Jones on the ground. What was really interesting was Max looked irritated and he wanted to get off. And I've heard him say, look, I just don't, it's enough talk about 𝗟𝗏 now. I thought they made a mistake playing 𝗟𝗏 last week, and I said as much on the podcast. But one of the positives of playing him is that, I mean, he had a pretty good game. So, from that perspective, I think that they made the right call in hindsight, but I was critical at the time. But is that they got away, some of that noise away at least, and this was his second game. But, I think that he's got a long way to go. The sort of discussion that he had on the ground, he's really open and honest young man in some respects. But I really admire Max. I think Max, this could be the making of the team in some, a lot of positives could come out of this situation. One of which is just the pure leadership of Max Gawn. I mean, he put 𝗟𝗏 up. He's about to have a baby, and he's got 𝗟𝗏 staying with him over the preseason, and then he's sort of like his big brother on the ground, protecting him. And the other thing about that kick to JVR was, one, it would have been a team rule. They would have been working on that all summer. If you've got someone lead to the pocket, the rule is, doesn't matter whether you think you can kick the goal, you kick it. And he changed his mind, and I reckon he mucked with the person trailing JVR, assumed it was going along and left JVR go forward. His ability to change his mind and then sort of put up that kick just showed how skilled he is.
There was another one where he changed his mind as well. He's not a left footer, is he?
No, he's not.
So he was on his left. He was on his left, and he probably could have kicked it on his left, but obviously thought, well, I'm about 40 out, and he didn't. He then passed it off, and I think with his left. But he sort of had that think about it, where I think in previous years he might not have.
Yeah.
And just on a tactical thing, that comment from 3183 is really interesting. I hadn't really I watched the replay and I hadn't noted his positioning. And he's right, though, in hindsight. He did play behind the ball a bit, which is perhaps that role that Gus played a lot, where he was that reliable player behind the ball, and which might help explain why his uncontested possession numbers were so high.
Yeah,
I want the ball in his hand because he makes good decisions, and his peripheral vision is so good, and his footy IQ is so good that he can change his mind like the best players can. Like Windsor looks like he can. He looks like, you can see the quality players, that ability to do different things, and maybe that's a role for him going forward to help us mitigate the loss of Gus.
I think the other point that needs to be made is that Goodwin in his post-match interview said something like, Clary's got a way to go yet, and then Clary said the same thing in the post-game interview, that he knows that he's got to win the trust, I think was the words used back, of everybody. So he knows it, the coaches know it, they recognise it, that's the important thing, and if he's doing all the right things, that's great. We'll get to see the best of him yet again.
And I think that's, again, it's like a cliche, but it's about him as a person, not him as a footballer. And if it comes out of it and he's in a better space and he's sort of made he's grown as a person, then what a massive win for everyone. I thought you're spot on, George. That comment, in fact, was one of the most revealing comments. Sarah Jones asked about the game, about, well, is this, have you got the support of your teammates back? And he was adamant. He said straight away, no, not yet. One performance doesn't undo the things. So I thought that was a really mature response from Clary. And leaving aside that stuff, one of the amazing things about yesterday really was who were our best players? Maxi, Maisie, Oliver and Track. I mean, and Billings. You'd throw Billings in as well, your top 5 players. So that's fantastic that our best players stood up when needed.
On T-Mac and Hoare in defence, Lazy says, thought aside from a few curly moments, T-Mac was exceptional in his original position down back. Do you think that he was starting to get a bit stale up forward and that maybe a fresh change was needed? We see key position players reinvent themselves often like this. Mandy Lorian adds, T-Mac and Hoare were great inclusions. Everyone is worried about T-Mac's disposal, but with the exception of one howler, which he should have just hoofed it, I thought his disposal was pinpoint. He knows when to spoil, and he has a great pair of hands, and he knows when to clunk it. I reckon he's a better option than Tomlinson, who I thought was still stiff to be dropped, or was a very adequate replacement for Bowie and was solid. How did you guys think the backline functioned, given that we had made 2 changes to players who hadn't played a lot of footy in the backline over the last few years? Jano2 adds, just wondering what the panels thought of Marty Hoare's return to senior footy. I thought he fitted in beautifully and complemented our backline. Hopefully he will have an injury-free season and cement his spot. Thanks for the excellent podcast. So, George, your thoughts on the games of T-Mac and Hoare in defence?
Apologies to Bowie for a start, because I think this was the best team defence from the back 6 that I have seen in this game. The addition of T-Mac I was worried about initially because he's been so long out of it. Everybody from a couple of years ago who remembers when he last played in the back line always had the heart in the mouth whenever he was kicking. He played his role absolutely brilliantly. Marty Hoare played his role absolutely brilliantly, and more importantly, it enables people like May and it enables Lever to do what they want to do instead of having to cover for people who aren't playing their roles. T-Mac's big body was absolutely essential in a couple of circumstances because the Bulldogs' forward line is pretty impressive. And then we had Howes and Rivers off the half-back line as well, who were just as equally impressive and filling, just cogs in this wheel. They were ruthless. Binman's talked about the number of times it went inside 50, the number of times it went inside 50 and went straight out again, because we had the right people in the right time, in the right circumstances. Every single time it went in there, we were rarely caught out.
Even when the ball hit the ground, which is why those ground ball numbers surprised me. Must have been they were winning them up the ground because we were winning them inside their 50.
They got nothing. If it wasn't for 𝗟𝗋𝗀𝗀𝗀 taking contested mark, and you can't do anything about that, he was fantastic. If it wasn't for him, honestly, this would have been a 10-goal win quite easily. Our defence was just superb, absolutely superb. So Mr. 𝗟𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 might be worried about how he gets back into the team, but he's got a little bit of time to worry about that. But yeah, 𝗪𝗏 was just superb. He knew when to punch, when to mark, when to go, when to stop. And I'm afraid Tomo doesn't, and that's the difference for me. I couldn't fault his game, particularly in Sydney, but you don't know how well he works with the others. But 𝗪𝗏 really worked with the others brilliantly for the whole game.
And just a shout out to Marty Hoare is in all of the offs, with Gus and Clary, and all of what I think a big part of it is just confected baloney, to be honest. That was the biggest sort of beat up over the preseason. But leaving that aside, what a great story Marty Hoare is. Coming back to AFL after how many seasons did he?
1,667 days or whatever it was.
And he played VFL. Where did he play VFL?
Werribee, I think.
Werribee, right. Yeah. So, and he looks so fit, looks as fit as a fiddle, and he's actually a really good size for modern footy in terms of that defensive stuff, because he can play tall when he's mobile enough to, play on. He was on Waitman at one point, for instance. I thought it was a terrific game, and I love also the fact that he's another lefty. So having two lefties coming out of the back half, I think, is a real bonus.
And now, even though he didn't play this week, there's a bit on Tomlinson. Ross Milan asks, can any of the panel explain why Tomlinson was dropped? Who was manning Jamarra Ugle-Hagan during the match? It's hard to see the matchups on TV. Thanks for all the hard work and on the pod, guys. Engorged Dungan adds, apologies if this has already been put forward. It's probably more of a general comment on team selection, but can we have a discussion on the non-selection of Tomo, in the sense that most people agree he was stiff to be dropped? Was he dropped because he had a poor game? That seems unlikely. Was he dropped because he is behind 𝗪𝗏 in the pecking order, potentially? Was he dropped because he failed to meet certain internal KPIs, potentially as well? What I think also needs to be considered is that over the course of the season, certain teams have certain preferred matchups, and all things considered, some of the players in the picked 20 to 27 range will be in and out of the side based on this week's opponents. A non-selection is not an indicator of the binary. Are you good or are you poor? So Tomlinson has to be one of the unluckiest blokes to ever poll votes in the Demonland Player of the Year. The two times that he's featured in votes recently, he's been dropped the next week. Binman, any thoughts on the dropping of Tomlinson?
Yeah, I think George hit the nail on the head. I mean, there was Engorged Onion touched on it, but there's one thing, we don't know what the internal KPIs are, and we don't know what the team rules are. And so it is possible, unlikely, but it is possible he broke team rules and that's why he's not out, but that's probably unlikely. But, make the point is that we don't know what the club know and what, is expected of him. Personally, I think it's probably the most likely answer to that question is exactly what George said, is that I don't think he plays the zone as well as 𝗪𝗏. It's almost as simple as that. He's a one-on-one pure lockdown defender at his best. And as Engorged Onion sort of touched on, I think it comes down to matchups. So keeping in mind, we came into the game with a clear that the fans didn't know about. Fans didn't know that Goody had done the history and looked back over the last, whatever number of years to work out what was going to work in the opening game of the season. Came in with a clear strategy to stretch the game to ground and to use kick marking, 141 marks being the most marks ever. So it meant that we're always going to be running and stretching and moving around the ground. It was going to be a game that was high aerobic demand. And so I think that probably the simplest answer is that Tomo didn't fit with that. He's weak. He's biggest weakness is he's not quick enough. He's slow. Now, Tomo isn't, people might say, T-Mac's even slower. I think George's point is the important one. He may be slower. If they had a head-to-head race, and who knows, maybe it would be pretty close. But the thing is, Tomo reads the ball so well here, and he's so confident in going off his man and being able to zone off. You've got a forward line that of 𝗟𝗏𝘀𝗁, Norton, and Lobb up there, and Waitman. And all four of our defenders, Hoare, T-Mac, 𝗦cie and Lever, all rotated across those players at different times. So the question of who played on 𝗟𝗏𝘀𝗁, all did. May took him sometimes, Lever took him sometimes.
Hoare was on him.
Hoare took him sometimes. And my own view is that Tomlinson doesn't, he can't manage that system. It's not his strength. His strength is you give him one player for the whole match like a Hawkins. So he stays on Hawkins for the whole game, and that's his role. I don't think he's got the sort of defensive skill set. Like it's a real skill set to do what Tomo. You need a level of confidence to leave your man and, be confident that you're, that someone else is going to come across and cover that. And I think, that would be my guess as to why. I think it's a horses for courses. I think there'll be matches where they'll bring Tomlinson in. The challenge is man management. Clearly, like all of the elite level footballers, he's an alpha player who wants to be playing senior footy. It's going to be really hard, but to be, not to be sort of hard-nosed about this, but he's signed a new contract. He knows what the deal is. They would have communicated it to him. He probably has a good sense of his strengths and weaknesses. And I think that just in such a fluid, dynamic defensive half, as George said, it was movement. Like part of this new way of playing is the ball is in motion all the time. You've got to be thinking. You've got to be prepared to know when to zone off, know when not to zone off. And I don't think that sort of model suits Tomo's skill set.
The other thing that I think Tomo has a failing with is he's very slow to move the ball on. He can intercept quite successfully, but he takes too long for the current model to be able to move the ball on. We need quick movement out of the back line really quickly because that's your attack. That's where your attacks are starting from these days. So,
particularly on a day like yesterday, George, where it was so clearly evident that's what they were trying to do, is to get it moving at all times. And
if he's looking left and looking right and trying to pick the right, no, you've just got to go.
Yeah.
And I was surprised by T-Mac because in the past I wouldn't have thought he was that sort of player, but he certainly did in this game. There was no question about where the ball was going. He was off and delivering. So, But the other thing, I think Tomo will still get his opportunity because, as I've said before, I would have been happy if we get 10 games out of T-Mac this year, given his injury history. Yeah. So opportunities will arise. There will be other people in the back line will suffer injuries at some stage, so he'll get another chance.
And as we talked about, our system is so strong. He will be able to slot back in and it won't be an issue. I mean, people are saying he played well against the Swans because he did, but they're applying him sort of in some respects an old school logic about what a defender does, which is keeping his direct opponent to a few marks and few goals. But there's the KPIs for T-Mac would have been, much more complex than your direct. He didn't have a direct opponent. So similar with Lever. How do you judge Lever's game on who? Waitman didn't kick a goal. Who gets credit for, or maybe he got one, but who gets credit for keeping Waitman quiet when multiple players played on him?
On Billings, Howes and Windsor, Master Chief says, I was recommended this podcast by a work colleague early last year. Big shout out to Mad Dog Matty. And it has become a staple of my podcast listening week. If I don't get through the show on my commute, then I will finish it off on my nightly sojourns walking the dog through the mean streets of Ivanhoe. Thank you to Andy, B-Man and George for all the effort you put into this podcast, and know that the in-depth analysis that you provide is much needed and appreciated, especially after a loss. I don't have a question but a comment, and it highlights how good our recruiting and trading has been. Thought Billings had a solid game, and he provides a great link up between our midfield and our forward line. Windsor and Howes both look like they belong at AFL level. I reckon in a few weeks we'll be talking about Howes being the 𝗟𝗏𝘀𝗁 of 2024. Thank you for your time, and as B-Man is fond of saying at the end of each show, go Redleggers. Yes, I do listen right to the end. Pitmaster adds, who was the last demon who could regularly deliver the sort of pass Billings used on the northern wing to set up track for a shot at goal in the third term? My nomination is Trapper. And let's hear what you think of House's 2 games. He seems to have fitted in seamlessly to the defensive group, who were collectively very strong. Oh My D's got a question in late, but he adds, understand it's late, but I'm sure it'll be mentioned on the pod anyway. But take a bow, Jack Billings. If he can keep his body right, he'll be one of the recruits of the season. His second game in the red and blue against 𝗪𝗡₀, everyone's calling it 𝗪𝗪𝗀, was very impressive with 23 disposals, 15 marks, 20 kicks, 10 score involvements, 21 pressure acts, as been mentioned earlier, and 1 goal. Well, a couple of players were playing their first game on the G, and even for Billings, if you guys were to guess, I have it here, how many matches do you think Billings has played on the MCG?
7.
Oh,
George?
Yeah, I really wouldn't know. He's played so few games in the last 2 years in any case. So, yeah, 10.
10. Well, you were the closest without going over. That's the Price is Right rules. 15 matches on the G in his 157-game career. So that was his 15th. I thought Billings was excellent, and just what we needed is the link up between the backs and the forwards. 15 marks, all uncontested, which means that he was out on his own a lot. And I expect the teams might mind him a little bit more closely in the coming weeks if he continues to become a problem for oppositions as we transition from turnovers. Howes, with his 16 possessions at 88% disposal efficiency, continues to impress, and he may well become the 𝗟𝗻𝗀𝗃 of this season. And Windsor, too, continues to show why we drafted him so high. The rundown tackle, which stopped a certain score, if not a goal, was fantastic, and acts like those are real team lifters. So, George, your thoughts on all 3, starting with Billings?
Yeah, can't add too much more than what we've already said. Billings was fantastic. I think we're using him remarkably differently from what the Saints used him. I think he was more of a small forward type, goal kicking when he was at the Saints. In this game, again, I think what he brought to the game was an addition to the structure that in the absence of Hunter, well, we've got a second gamer in Windsor playing on the other wing. We've got a rotation available for people like Langdon, and for Windsor, he certainly needs a break at some stage. So there was almost a constant rotation between those 3 on both sides of the ground. I could never work out who was actually on what wing and who wasn't on what side of the ground and things like that during the game. But he was a great link, and I think we're going to see not just a good recruitment from that perspective, but just to be able to utilise him in a different way and a more effective way, as we saw, than what the Saints ever used him. So that'll do a great deal for his confidence. I think he was really shattered after, from the injury aspect, and then being dumped so many times at the Saints. Doesn't do any favours for anybody. So if he keeps playing the way the way he did in this game, then the opposition coaches will be paying a lot more attention to him, like they did over the last couple of years to Langdon, shut down Langdon, and you stopped a lot of our movement. But now you've got to worry about Billings, and the speed of Windsor is just extraordinary. So on Howes was just magnificent again, fitted into the structure beautifully, played his role perfectly, went when he needed to go, marked when he needed to mark.
Makes good decisions.
And for a kid effectively, basically in his second game as well, it was superb, So very, very, very promising that you can come in and fit into that sort of defensive structure. And having lost Hibberd, we might have found a couple of near replacements in 𝗏 and Howes to pick up that role. So we haven't lost anything in the defence.
And it's actually, now you mentioned, I forgot when I was talking about the sort of new players in the defence. As you say, it's only second game. So yesterday you had 𝗏 coming in, Howes in his second game in playing in defence, and T-Mac coming in. 3 of your it's remarkable, really. As again, sort of it goes to the strength of the system, but that you could have so many new players in a defensive system and it still function as well as it did yesterday. And for me, my personal KPI for when our defence is working well, I love it, is when defenders or someone, an opposition player has got the ball in the back half and they look up the ground and they're frustrated and they don't know what, they're annoyed that there's not an immediate option to give, and they end up switching or taking on a high risk kick to the corridor. And I just love it. It seems to me that's when our defensive system's fully wound up. We're pressing teams, we just won't let them out.
The use of the wings. Mr. Freeze says, thoughts on our use of the wings. Langdon appears to be back to his best with gut, run and link. Something new was the D splitting our offensive wing between Windsor from half back to centre and then Billings from centre to half forward. The conditions and game plan suited Billings' strengths to a T. So Mr. Free then added some graphics from the Telstra tracker. Big man, you had a bit of back and forth with Mr. Freeze about our use of the wings in the podcast thread. How did you see our use of the wings, and do you like what you've seen so far?
Yeah, that was really interesting post from Mr. Freeze. He put up the graphic that you mentioned was the screenshot from the Telstra tracker on the app, and a new thing that they've got this year on the app is their time in forward half. So basically, if you look at it, the Windsor and Billings, basically you can see where they're on the heat map where they are on the ground. They basically shared the wing. And so it was the southern wing, I'm guessing most of the time, but they shared that wing with Billings playing 60% forward and Windsor playing 40% back. And you could actually see on the heat maps that they sort of almost met in the middle. And essentially that was the sort of discussion I was having with Mr. Freeze. That's a really fascinating way. Then what role would you say Billings had, what position? And it's a bit that I was talking about last week in terms of this sort of rise of these players that are high half forwards, wingers, utilities. They're sort of, and Sparrow, that was, if Sparrow wasn't in the middle, what role was he playing? And it's this, high half forward linking role, but it was really noticeable. So Langdon basically did all the work on one wing. So if you look at his heat map, it's quite well spread from defensive arc to the forward 50, with more of an emphasis on defensive arc because that's key to his role. But it really looked visually like basically Windsor and Billings split the wing role together, and it meant. What that meant was Billings was the one kicking inside 50. So that question about that kick to track, that's what you want. You want the Billings kicking inside 50. That's what we got into the club for. So I thought that was really interesting, and that's something to watch going forward. It's become a really funny sort of new role, I think, that high half forward utility wing role. And there's just so much running involved in footy, as I've talked about a lot. But that seemed to work really well, and I'll be really interested to see against the Hawks if they use the same model.
Well, remember at that time we played the Hawks where they put a lot of time, I think it was them that they put a lot of time into Langdon to try and curb his influence in the game. Well,
as George notes, they're going to have to think about putting time into Billings because if he's going to be so key to our inside 50 kick. The other thing just about Windsor is that he just looks like such a natural footballer. There was a bit of play where we were doing a sort of ring around the rosy handball, and it ended up in his hands, and it looked like we're going to turn the ball over. And he just had the speed to sort of take a step, but he delayed his handball and got it out to Clary, who cleared it. It was just the mark of a player that is pure class. You can't teach that. It's instinctive, the way he sort of delayed it. And I really think a big factor, we've really lacked pure, not too bad speed-wise, but pure, really raw speed, and he's got it in spades. And, as I said last week, it was great watching him live. He really reminds me of Alan Johnson.
Centre bounce attendances. We talked a little bit about this, but Pingu says last week you had a discussion about whether Salem's midfield role would be impacted by the loss of Bowie, and you were lamenting losing a sort of newfound weapon in the middle that was needed with the loss of Gus and the uncertainty surrounding Oliver a few weeks back. Well, yesterday we witnessed the glorious return of Clary to the MCG, and Salem still attended the most centre bounces of all of our midfielders, and 𝗟𝗲 was an adequate replacement for 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘀𝘁. I'd call that a win. Thanks to Demonland at 𝗟𝗡 for these stats. Max obviously attended the most centre bounces with 25, followed by 𝗟𝗱𝗰 with 22, Oliver 20, 𝗦cie 20, Track 18, Pickett 7, and 𝗟𝗑𝗋 4. An addendum, were you happy with 𝗨cie Pickett's 7 centre bounce attendances? Is that enough, or do you want more? So, George, last week we were indeed worried that the injury to 𝗟𝗀𝘀𝗀𝗃 would see the necessity of 𝗟𝗱𝗰 returning to half-back, but fortunately the injection of 𝗟𝗲 to effectively replace 𝗟𝗀𝘀𝗀𝗃 allowed 𝗟𝗱𝗰 to remain in the middle. Some people actually said 𝗟𝗱𝗰 didn't have a good game, but I think he was all right. So, what do you think?
Yeah, look, 𝗟𝗱𝗰's going to stay in the middle for the whole season, so people can forget about him going back to the half-back line. We've still got plenty of opportunity there with the right sort of players. The good thing about 𝗟𝗱𝗰 in the middle is that he becomes part of that rotation that we knew. With the loss of Gus, we needed someone in there who's highly skilled. And that's what he brings to the middle. He does so many things in the game where he gets 0 stats for. You know, he's just that touch of the ball that gets to someone, that knockout, that push of the player to open the opportunities. He's just such a smart footballer.
He's clever, isn't he?
Yeah, he's really, really clever.
He set up a goal, George, but exactly what you mean is, it was in the last quarter when we were sort of running over the top of the ground, but he sort of stood up and kicked it with his foot like a soccer kick forward, and it was just so clever. There's no way he could have bent down to pick it up. He needed to get it out and found a way to do it and kick it to one of our players.
Yeah, he's just a really smart player, and he's just another string to the bow. Similarly for 𝗨cie, you don't want to burn 𝗨cie because playing in the middle, there's so many big bodies in there. He can certainly take a hit and hand out a hit, but he's playing almost identically to what 𝗟𝗏 used to do at Hawthorn in their great years. You know, limited shock troop type operations in the middle for, in this case, 7 centre bounces. Then he moves forward and annoys the hell out of the opposition up there. He's such a dangerous player but I think in this game he played a lot more around the ground than what I was used to seeing him. So maybe they're giving him a third role that we haven't quite seen yet. It's only the second game, but I'll be keeping an eye on that in the coming games.
He kicked a goal and then they put him straight to the middle, and it just creates like a buzz, doesn't it? It's like when you see 𝗨𝗨𝗀𝗀𝗃 go to the middle, and like you noted that it was really interesting how few players the Dogs ran through the middle, and so did we. But you throw a 𝗨𝗨𝗀 in there, and suddenly it forces the opposition coach's hand. What do you do? Do you respond somehow to that, or you don't? He's so dynamic, isn't he?
And it scares the hell out of the opposition ruckman, because if you put the ball anywhere near him, he's more than likely to finish up with it. So changes the whole dynamic, like I said, the whole dynamic in the middle.
Just one thing on just the centre bounces. Scores from centre bounces are almost not a thing anymore. So it was, I think, 12-8 points in this game or some such. When the 666 came in, it was a sort of key number. Like it was, you might score 4 goals from it. But teams have worked out ways to stop teams getting out the front now as often as they do. And so when that goal to 𝗦cie really stands out because how rare it is in footy these days.
Yeah, and let's face it, the Dogs have got a pretty decent midfield. You don't expect to get too many free kicks. Used the wrong word there. Too many opportunities. With that sort of quality player in the middle. So.
Except in a grand final, maybe. Big Benny Brown on him. Leave it to Diva asks, is there a chance Big Benny Brown will get back to his old form, or are his injuries too inhibiting? If BBB's form continues, would there be room enough to play Petty, Benny and 𝗟𝗑𝗋 all at the same time? Thanks, gents. Singer says, our forward line seemed more functional with Ben Brown in it, not only in the 50-metre arc, but taking marks up the line too. We simply don't get that same thing from 𝗟𝗍𝗃. Having said that, he seems to be being held together with tape, and it might be only a matter of time before his knee blows, hopefully not too soon. I understand he doesn't do much training, in particular the contact stuff. Can he play the entire season? Because I would love to have him come finals. What should our plan for nursing Big Benny Brown through the season be? Demon WA adds, great to see two much maligned players, Benny Brown and T-Mac, play solid games, proof that you should never write anyone off. Deceiving says, the Dogs' backline was seriously undersized, but one had to be impressed by Ben Brown. Seems to move as well as he has since his time at Melbourne, getting himself high up on the wings to provide an outlet, and then actually clunked a few with very clean hands. Fixture is a bit tricky for the next 3 games. Hawks, then 2 games in Adelaide in the space of 5 days. It feels like Ben's form is a good opportunity to get VFL game time into Petty and maybe seek to have him back for the second game in South Australia. That might also be a good time to rest Ben if he gets through the next 2 games successfully. Demon Dave says, it's great to see Brown fit and firing, and I remember that he had a few big weeks at the start of the last season too. I thought that Brown really helped with the structure up forward, and he consistently brought the ball to ground when needed. His presence also clearly assisted JVR. My question is whether that is a function of having a leading tall in the side and Petty will be a straight swap when fit, or do you think Brown will keep his place if fit? And finally, yes, it was a win for the ages, says the management of Petty and Big Benny Brown is crucial to our final success in September. Our first big test of our player management planning is back-to-back games in Adelaide. Petty in this week, even though he's very, very, very rusty in his VFL hit-out. Big Benny Brown rested for the Port game. BBB out for Adelaide game and Petty in for gather round. I would also be contemplating Fullerton coming in against either the Power or the Crows to help Max out during this period. What are your thoughts, gentlemen? Well, George, the topic of managing or nursing Big Benny Brown, as he's been referred to, through the season is one we've discussed before. He's competing in the forward 50 arc is something we just weren't, as I think one of the guys said, weren't getting with 𝗟𝗍𝗃. He's leading and marking up the wing is also something we haven't been getting, particularly late in the season last year when we were left with pretty much only JVR as a tall forward and he had to stay in the 50-metre arc. He's kicked 2 goals too, which could have easily snagged 3 or 4. Having a guy that competes also means that the opposition have to respect him and play a decent defender on him. That in turn frees up a JVR to kick 3 goals himself and also not leaving us in a situation where JVR is getting double teamed. So BBB was a great and welcome addition to the team. However, that knee, as Singer mentioned, is being held by gaffer tape. It could blow at any time. Benny was running up and down the field. I even saw him deep down back at one stage. All that running is going to take a toll. When he was running to the bench at times, it did look like he was pained, if not outright limping off just yet. So, George, going to have to nurse him through the season. We know from our training track watches that he is on a very limited training program to extend the warranty on that knee. So your thoughts on the next few weeks, keeping in mind that we have Petty and Fullerton waiting in the wings. What do you expect over the next few games? Games against Hawks, 2 Adelaide games, then returning to play the Lions before the bye.
I think it was all well summed up by yourself and all the people who contributed to that. I was really impressed with his game. I said to the guy I was sitting with on the weekend, he doesn't get any shorter as the game goes on, and in the absence of Alex Keith for the Dogs, poor old 𝗟𝗏 really got done over badly, unsurprisingly. Really impressed with what he did.
For Benny Brown to get around him.
Yeah.
Terrible kick from track, though. He tried to put it into. If we'd not scored a goal there, I would have. I would have been unimpressed.
He was running up and down the ground. It was like Benny Brown in 2021 in the grand final. Providing that opportunity as a down the line mark. What's more, though, a down the line contested marks. We haven't seen that for a long time.
And they're key. They're so important, aren't they? No matter what game plan you've got, you take them, you control the ball.
Take that. You're into attack. You don't take those, and it's gone. Yep. It's completely goes the other way. I said before, his presence there did a couple of things. It freed up the smalls if he wasn't marking it. and he still took 6 marks for the game, which is pretty good. All of a sudden, the Smalls start to kick goals as well because he does bring the ball to ground. If he can't get there, then he does bring the ball to ground, which is equally as critical in the front, and it relieves 𝗟𝗻𝘀 as well. 𝗟𝗻𝘀 has obviously been anointed as the backup ruck, and he has to go into the middle. Previously, poor old 𝗟𝗻𝘀 had to play full forward and backup ruck, but with Benny Brown in there, he gives him a break, which is all important. And it's a long, long season for a kid who's still only 20 years of age. So we've got to look after 𝗟𝗻𝘀. As to the medical condition, I think I said I'd be happy if we get 10 games out of him for the season. He's going to have to be managed. They're already managing his training loads. From what I understand, he's been bone on bone in the knee for quite a while. So he can't really play multiple games in a row. So what I suspect will happen is that he probably will play this week, again to take full advantage of the desperation that the Hawks will have, because Sicily apparently, unless he's successful in his appeal, won't be playing. So Benny doesn't get any shorter again, and their only other backman's Hardwick. Can't remember the other ones. But he's someone who could really exploit them this coming week. We then go to Adelaide, and I think I think it'll be doubtful that we'll see Petty.
5 days later, we play that game.
Adelaide, yeah. Adelaide's the danger one. You don't want to be playing in Adelaide 5 days later when you've got a dodgy knee and you've played 2 in a row already.
Again, the previous week against Port at home, at home, that will be, it's always a tough game, that one. So, I mean, that call to rest him, play him and then rest him is a good one, I think. Yeah,
and I think we'll see a lot of that during the season, and hopefully Petty's back and available for that. He only played 2 quarters from
3. They said 3.
Yeah. Did they? Right, yeah. And who was it?
Fullerton?
No, Pickett 𝗪cie, a track watcher.
Picket fence.
Picket fence, yeah, picket fence. He said he hardly touched it. But give him time to get back. It's not unsurprising. The guy's had a long rehabilitation over the summer, has barely been on the track, so it's not surprising. So give him, I suspect, another week in the VFL just to get fitness up. Not to put one under the belt. It's just to get fitness up in this case because he just hasn't been on the track.
Yeah.
And Benny Brown will probably get a break, and then we'll see where we take him from there. But he was a big positive to the way we played in this game.
And I mean, as you say, like you've got to put a tall, decent defender on him. Simple as that. And so you do that. That tall, decent defender can't play on 𝗟𝗻𝘀. You can't. You can't make 2 people out of one. So, and the other thing that hopefully they'll manage him, and hopefully he's, ideally he's available come finals, because the one sort of, I don't know if it's a question mark, but I just think that we've got to be a little bit careful about our expectations on Petty. Sure, he had a good run. Sure, he kicked accurately. But, I mean, reality is he only played forward for 4 games. And so, he may not end up being the great forward that we all hope he is. I mean, it's a bloody small sample size. So, ideally we have the flexibility to have Benny Brown fully fit. And I think that's the other string to bow to T-Max bow, obviously, is that he's a rare player that can be a good swing player within a match.
And you're right about Petty. Let's not raise the expectations too much. Foot injuries seem to take a long, long time to come good. We saw it with T-Mac. It almost cost him 2 years out of his career.
Yeah.
Can you see us trialling playing 3 talls, whether it's Petty or Fullerton, in the next few weeks?
I can see us trialling a lot of things, because Goody has got criticised, goes back to this idea of he's stubborn. For 2 years we played a particular way because it was successful, but then last year we tried a whole lot of different things at the beginning of 23, and we're clearly trying a whole bunch of different things this year. For one thing is the number of people kicking the ball out from after a point. is I think there were 4 different players who did it on the weekend, where it was always May, and everyone was complaining about. I still heard someone complaining this week about kicking to the 𝗟𝗻𝗀𝗀 down the line. Thinking, are you watching? What's going on here? Well, what game are you watching? Because they barely did that at all. And tactically, another interesting thing that they were doing was 𝗟𝗻𝗀𝗀, after a point, was running to the mid stage of the ground to be an option for the second kick after the kick in. So they're trialing lots of different things. And so, yes, I could see them trial it just to throw a kite up in the air. And so if they do and it doesn't work, I think that fans should sort of go, okay, well, it didn't work. But no, not long-term in terms of, I think that's probably too tall.
Following on from whether we play a third tall leads into this question from 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝗁𝗀𝗀, who says, also it doesn't come through in the stats, but I thought JVR was excellent when he went into the ruck, ran at the ball, competed on the ground, and didn't really get shown up by his opponent. Is he our best second ruck option? I'm starting to think that he is. Now, I think that JVR, he didn't lower his colours too much in the ruck. He was asked to go up against Tim English a few times as well when giving Max a chop out and lob. Having said that, I don't like the notion of robbing Peter to pay Paul, as we say, but I'd prefer JVR up forward. But it then plays into the second forward options if it's Ben Brown, Petty or Fullerton. Of those, only Fullerton would be a backup ruck. You're not going to see Benny Brown in the ruck. You're not going to see Petty probably in the ruck. So who's a better second forward option? And then we're back. Can you have 3 tall forwards? And I don't know. What do you think about JVR being the second ruck option? Well, because without 𝗟𝗂𝗀, who that's what he was, and we're probably in agreement that 𝗟𝗂𝗀 shouldn't be playing.
I think that I think this season there's going to be a lot of chop and changing. So, the game is going to come around 23. It's like I said, there's 2 seasons now. I think it's really sort of not worth the sort of thinking about all of the different options and think, well, this is going to be the fixed one. I personally would prefer JVR, not ruck so often. He went to 21 ruck contests. He only got 2 ruck outs. He had, hit outs. That's because he's against English and lob. But he gave the critical thing is, George noted before, has noted many times, but he gave 𝗟𝗂𝗀𝗀𝗀 a chop out. So if 𝗟𝗂𝗀𝗀𝗀 was sick last week? Well, he didn't get much of a chop out. JVR 21 contests. I looked at the numbers before. He only had 7 disposals, and because he kicked goals, you think, well, that's a pretty impressive game, and it is, of course. But as the question sort of intimates, that his value was giving 𝗟𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 a chop out, and he's such a competitor. Even if he gets beaten, he's smashing into lob, he's smashing into English. I think comparing 𝗟𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀, for instance, and JVR, we talked about this last week, but none of those other young ruckmen are doing 20. Taking 20 ruck contests like he is. It's remarkable given his age. And so, Fullerton is brought in to play that role, but who knows? I think they'll look at different options. But at the moment, he's doing that job, and he looks fit and strong. And in 2-3 years, that could be his point of difference. He could end up being Jackson.
The other one that we could use potentially is 𝗟𝗏𝗀.
Yeah.
Yep. So, but it'll be chop and change, and depending on who's available, and management of players like Ben Brown and 𝗟𝗏𝗀 about who's in, and but having the players available is the important thing to us as the season progresses.
So you're saying we just take it 1 week at a time?
That's the phrase we need.
Smurf says, I was critical of our small forwards last week, but I thought they played better and contributed more this week. Do you think that had anything to do with 𝗏𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 returning? So yesterday we saw the welcome return of the small forward brigade hitting the scoreboard. Chandler 3, Nibbler 2, 𝗍𝗂𝗋𝗃𝗃𝗃 2. You love to see it. George, our Mosquito fleet was on song. 7 goals between them. You can't ask much more than that.
I'd put it more down to Ben Brown and the way the structures were back in place that had been missing for so long. 𝗍𝗂𝗋𝗃 adds excitement all around the ground, not just in the forward line. I'd put it down to other factors rather than just 𝗍𝗂𝗋𝗃 being in there.
All right, let's move on. Forward 50 entries. Pitmaster says, the impression I had from being at the G and not yet having seen the replay is that the team is still adapting to a faster, more direct style. Numerous possession chains that looked promising ultimately broke down due to an inability to execute at pace. I would expect this to improve as this season progresses. In other words, exciting times ahead. What are the panel's thoughts on this? We also have a voicemail from our friend of the show, 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗃, who talks about a number of things that we've already covered, but wants to know our thoughts on our forward 50 entries. I'll play the clip and then Big Man, you jump in to respond.
Hey boys, 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗃 here. Well, that was a good game to help with the Melbourne Demons SS. Pretty comprehensive, don't you think? The biggest interesting thing for me is, does Petty come straight back in? Who would go out? I was somewhat surprised with T-Mac being picked over Tomo, but happy to eat my words. I thought he was actually pretty good at it today. Still a few issues with entering 50. Need to sort of, I know that catch grove, lower your eyes, but just missed a few pretty easy targets there and made it harder for ourselves than we need to. We probably could have won with that by 10 goals, but overall a really good game. Interesting hearing your thoughts. How do you go on? Bye.
Yeah, I mean, I think going back to that question earlier about the concerning parts at the, was I concerned about the Dogs' domination in the beginning of the game? No, I wasn't. But what I was concerned about is that our fumbles in that first period. Track, I seem to be criticising Track a lot, but he fumbled a few times, and also as Salty suggests, we did miss some kicks going forward. There was one Salo missed. I forget who he was passing to, but he missed it by a mile. It's going to happen, isn't it? I mean, like even the best kicks in the AFL were 75%, disposal efficiency. That means 25% of the time they miss their targets, and we've got a lot of butchers. But as to that question, about our method and handballing, I think I've talked about before. I think it's exciting to watch, and we're definitely going to be implementing it. It's going to be fascinating this week because Hawthorn have been trialling a model under Mitchell that is quite radical in some respects, and it's very sort of fast movement, trying to get the ball going, it looks like a model that Clarkson, ironically enough, is been copying. There's also that sort of thought about McWalter. It's interesting. McWalter obviously left the Tigers and coached the Tigers for half a season last year. The model that 𝗟𝗍 is playing is very similar to the model that McWalter had, and the model we're now playing is very similar to the Tigers model, which is what we're talking about before with Swans. Lots of handballs, taps those handballs into the ground, get it going, and the fans are going to have to, well, not going to have to, but can expect there's going to be lots of times when we turn it over because we make a mistake with hands. But one thing that pleases me about that model is that I think as a generalisation, we are much better handballing side than we are kicking side. So, they practice that. So, I mean, the modern footballers are phenomenal the way they can handball quickly and how in tight spaces. So, yeah, it's an exciting model to watch. I suspect we'll see a lot of it in the next 2 or 3 weeks and then and probably settle down mid-season, and then we'll go back to a more territory game as we approach the finals.
And finally, Lefty says, how good is watching footy at the G in shorts on a warm, sunny day? Any reason why the lights were switched on at 1:30 p.m. on a bright, sunny day? No wonder food and drink prices are so high these days. We're paying for their electricity bills. And this one had me perplexed as well. I couldn't believe my eyes when just after 1:30 on that bright, sunny day, the lights at the G were switched on. So much so that I felt compelled to tweet out to the world, tagging the MCG. I wrote, lights on at the MCG at 1:45 p.m. on a sunny day. I had a picture of it as well. The MCG's account actually replied to me, and this was their response. Hi, Demonland. Thank you for your message. The lighting is on due to the shadow that is on one side of the ground. Kind regards, MCG social media team.
What did they do in 1859 with that shadow?
You are joking.
You do me a favour, Andy, if you've got a direct link with the MCC, can you... I went to a music festival for 3 days, very loud music last weekend, super, super loud. Not once did I need to put earplugs in. It was ridiculous. The volume of the music where we were sitting, and I was sitting near you, was so ridiculously loud that I literally put earphones in to stop the noise. It was nuts. So if you could get onto that, that'd be great.
Talking about the PA system at the G, I don't know if it's just I don't have the greatest hearing. Listening to loud music my life has probably made them cactus. But I can't when Robbo's doing the interviews, I can't understand them. Is that just me, or is that just it's too loud?
Well, I wish that my ears are ringing from the volume of it. It's ridiculous. It's like I couldn't even speak. I was trying to speak to my friend and literally gave up and said, "It's just sorry."
I just wish that they'd listened to the fans, because fans of all clubs are saying, turn the volume down. We don't need all this yelling and screaming. We came to watch the football. I've got over the fact that they play music. That's fine. Play some Led Zeppelin, but you don't need to play it at bloody like a aeroplane going over the top. But back to the lights. What an absolute utter load of cobblers. That there's a shadow on the ground, for goodness sake.
It's probably the answer is to everything. It's because of TV.
Yeah, but I didn't see any shadow.
Anyway, we do have a question about the crowds. We might leave it till next week just to make a comparison between the Hawthorn game.
See how many Hawkers fans turn out, because there were bugger all Dogs fans, and it seemed to me there were plenty of D's fans. But we'll hold that discussion over the next week, because I want to get stuck into it. One thing
I will say about it, a lot of the reason is because that people complain about. Non-Melbourne people complain
TV
is because of the TV. It's the cameras are facing the AFL members, which looks like a GWS fan convention. If they, for Melbourne games, switch the cameras to the MCC side and the Olympic stand, it would look, because I can understand people look on TV, they look for a second, or they see the highlights on social media of a 𝗍𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 goal, and they see that there's no one in the crowd. Well, that's because the cameras aren't pointing to
George sits in the southern stand, so George should move around really quickly over there. And
had to move around this week. It was so damned hot.
Yeah, we need to move around. But, we might get into the crowd numbers a little later on. Let's get into injuries, 𝗍𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀, and changes. The Demons have a pretty healthy list at the moment. Lachie Hunter is about 2 weeks away from return to training, and Jake Bowie is only 1 week into his 8-week stint on the sidelines. Charlie Spargo was the not-so-mystery injury of the week last week, when he wasn't listed on the injury list during the week and then was omitted from the team because of injury. Daniel Turner is still 6 weeks away, and both McAdam and Melksham are still listed as TBC. The good news is that Harry Petty got through the game at 𝗍𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 on the weekend, playing 3 quarters in the forward line before completing a running program on the sidelines prior to the end of the match. The bad news is that, according to our 𝗍𝗲𝗀 watchers, he did not trouble the stats man all that much, if at all. Simon Goodwin, in his post-match presser, indicated that Petty is in the frame for selection, and round 2 was always the goal with him. 𝗍𝗲𝗀 faced Coburg, who last year did not win a single game from their 18 matches. The Demons ended up losing to the Lions by 16 points. Only 10 AFL-listed players lined up for 𝗍𝗲𝗀, with Colton Tolstrup held over as the emergency for the D's Bulldogs game. Andy Menzies-Wakefield kicked 2 goals off half-back. Tom Fullerton showed some agility in the ruck and kicked a goal early while drifting forward. Bailey Laurie and Kynan Brown played through the midfield, whilst Tomlinson, Matt Jefferson and Jed Adams played in defence. So that's interesting that they're playing Matt Jefferson in defence. They have the last 2 games, and I imagine it's a similar situation to in 2018 when Bailey Fritsch was played off the half-pack. Perhaps they're teaching him some defensive skills. Well, I hope that is, because if they're turning a forward into a defender, then I don't know what's going on there. Josh Shackey kicked 3 goals, booting 2 from the goal square after finding himself clear on multiple occasions, and that seems to be his MO. Royal Demon says, reports from 𝗍𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 had Petty not getting much of the footy. Would you be rushing him back this week, or let him find some form of fitness at 𝗍𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 for another week? George, followed by Bimman. What are your changes for the side to take on the Hawks at the MCG on Saturday?
No changes for me. I think Petty needs just a little bit more time, and we also need to start the rotations with Ben Brown as well. We don't want to bring in one just to give Ben a break unless it's absolutely necessary. We don't know all the medical ins and outs.
But
exactly. Yeah, so I would be not surprised to see Fullerton come in. If that was the case, I would not be surprised to see Fullerton come in with still Petty another week away. But anyhow, it's against the Hawks. We're lucky this week. Like I said, Sicily's up before the tribunal or the appeals board to try and get out of the kicking charge. I don't know that he's going to go very far with that. But he won't be available. That leaves Hardwick and who else is down there? Sam Frost, of course, is down there as one of the defenders. We all know about him. We should smash them all around the ground. I watched the Hawthorn Essendon game. It was horrible to watch. Two unskilled bottom. Sorry.
You want to get into the preview of that now? Or?
Oh yeah, we're halfway there, aren't we? So
we're still in changes at the moment.
Okay.
See if Big Man's got some changes quickly.
Yeah,
no changes.
No changes. The Hawks are without Sicily down back. He's their general down back, so they'll dramatically miss them. Hawthorn Essendon was horrible to watch. Neither team's going to trouble anybody too much this year. The Hawks got absolutely smashed in scores from stoppages, which will be one for Binman to keep an eye on in statistics for next week. Reed's their only ruckman.
Just on scores from stoppages, talk about getting smashed and saying that no longer is the number it used. 35 points they got. They were down 35 against Bombers of all teams.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that would be something we'd look to exploit for sure. If we got 22 plus 22 against the Dogs midfield, we should really go to work against the Hawks.
Yeah. Reed's their only real ruckman of any, and he doesn't work the same way that Max does. He doesn't provide very much input other than tapping the ball to the ground. They depend totally on Newcombe and 𝗟𝗶𝗃𝗀. I was surprised with 𝗟𝗶𝗃𝗀. He was playing a lot more than what he did in the practice matches, making a lot of contribution. Up forward, they haven't got Will Day, who they'll be missing in the midfield, who's critical to them. Up forward, they've got Lewis as basically their only major forward. I don't think we'll have any troubles with him at all.
The key...
before you get in, B-Man, because we did have a question from someone, and I've got a little bit of a preamble that I prepared this afternoon, so just bear with me before you get into your preview of the match. Since the 2018 semi-final, the Demons have had the wood over the Hawks, winning the last 7 of 8 clashes with 1 draw against them in our premiership season. Prior to 2018, the D's had lost 15 of 16 matches against the Hawks, so I take great pleasure in our dominance over a team that used to use us as a punching bag for over a decade. The Hawks under Sam Mitchell are in a rebuilding phase, which the Hawks hope will be fast-tracked this season. Hawks have a long injury list with a number of players I've never heard of. Players of note listed as TBC are Will Day, who you mentioned, Foot, Will Mackay back, Chad Wingard Achilles. Dylan Moore is a test with glandular fever. 𝗟𝗋𝗀𝗃𝗀𝗃 is still 4 to 5 weeks away with a hammy injury, and Denver Granger Barris is a 10 to 12 week injury with a toe injury. Captain and defender James Sicily, as mentioned, was suspended by the MRL for his kick on Don Andrew McGrath after the Hawk was set upon by a mob of Bombers. Hawthorn have appealed the 1-week ban, and the case will be heard on Tuesday night, so he may or may not be available to play pending the result of that hearing. The Hawks have played money ball in the off-season and have added Jack Gunston back onto their list. The 32-year-old joins Jack Ginnivan from Collingwood, Mabior Chol, Gold Coast/Richmond, and Massimo D'Ambrosia from Essendon in their round-round clash against the Bombers, which they ultimately lost by 24 points. Kiwi Demon says, I'm looking forward to another monster podcast this week as my only link to credible information about the club that I love. Thanks for all your hard work, guys. Demonland, the match previews and reports, the training intel and the podcast is so invaluable. You can't imagine how much it is appreciated by those who are bereft of any news, info and banter in our daily lives. Living across the ditch, I only get to the footy info that I actively seek out, which is mostly via Demonland and some social media. As a result, I know next to nothing about the current Hawthorn crop, particularly since they have thankfully been largely irrelevant since we knocked them out of the finals in 2018. I know they have an exciting crop of young midfielders and have been ravaged by injuries in the early part of the pre-season and may have their captain and best defender in 𝗙cie out this week. Other than that, I know squat about our opponent in the coming week. Can you shed some light on what we can expect this week and who will likely trouble us? We've heard from George. Big man, take it away.
I think George nailed it, and I was really interested to see that stoppages. That's a smashing 35 points in. I mean, Essendon's midfield's okay, but really 35 points is a lot. It's Hawthorn are really interesting because of the method that Mitchell's trying to implement, which is a very attacking method, and he's taken the approach in some ways that I guess is probably not the normal approach. The normal approach is to get your defence right and then build out from there. Mitchell's gone the opposite. He's tried to build attack and gone from there. And I have to say it's exciting to watch and everyone likes it, but I think it's got a flaw at the heart of it, because if you can't, I mean, Melbourne fans, when we were going through our bleak periods, when we couldn't stop opposition scoring when we were in our rebuild phase, it was so dispiriting. And defensively, they're all over the shop, and partly it takes years. Goody started building our defensive system in 2016 when he was assistant coach to 𝗟𝗏. He was in charge of our defensive system. So, that's 7-8 years of refining the system to get it where it is now, where you can have 3-4 players come into it and it look exactly the same. Hawthorn don't look like they've even begun that process, George, do they, in terms of, then you've got Frost playing Frost ball, and you've got, so key to the way that Mitchell wants to play is fast ball movement and using the width of the ground, lots of runners. And is it Josh Waddell? Waddell is really key,
very
really
fast.
Important to the way they play. He plays a similar sort of role, or a similar importance to the way they transition that Blakely does for the Swans. They like to get into his hands and let him run and take territory. All teams are wanting to get forward. All teams are wanting to get territory now. As George said, the switch is dead because it's the anti-territory. Of course, it will happen sometimes, and sometimes you want to rest momentum and stop it's just stop the game dead. But they like to get it forward. I think defensively they're going to really struggle with our attacking method. So because we're doing the same thing, the challenge for the Hawks will be stopping us. We won't have a problem stopping them. We're well and truly used to stopping the teams now moving fast off the halfback flank. We can compete with the Pies of the world. So, bring it, Hawks, in terms of that running. So I expect a really open running game. I don't think we'll use the kick mark as much as we did against the Swans, but it still might be a bit of a feature of the way we play. Hopefully it'll be dry. I think that defensive problem the Hawks has got is really the key reason why we've had the wood over them in recent times, and I fully expect that to happen again. And I could see, the other big thing for Hawthorn watching that game, it was a pretty rubbish game, wasn't it, George? But the big worry I would have if I was a Hawks fan is that, again, they looked gassed in the last quarter and the Bombers ran over the top of them. I thought the Hawks were going to win that game just because they seemed to be moving the ball better, but they ran out of gas, and those contested, they were like +8 or something at halfway through the third quarter. They ended up, for contested possessions, they ended up being -7 down. So in that last quarter and a bit, there was a 15 contested possession swing, which suggests that they ran out of legs a bit. And so we've got a 6-day break. That's the only probably negative of this. But I expect that the Hawks will struggle to score against us, and we won't struggle to score against them. You put those two things together, and I'm predicting a 20 to 30, maybe 40-point win.
We need to get off to a reasonable start with them as well, because they're so young. You don't
give them a sniff.
Don't give them the sniff in the first place. When they're enthusiastic and running, they look fantastic. But like in the Essendon game, they'll just run it. They will run out of steam.
Yeah, and ideally, Frida will get a goal early, get his confidence up, and we'll take our chances and take the wind out of the Hawks' sails. Is that another mixed metaphor, George?
The good news is for you, Bin Man, it will be a dry day. No chance for precipitation at this stage. 21 degrees at the ball bet with the ball.
Perfect
down.
humidity.
By the end of the game, it will be about 19 degrees. Humidity at 4:35 will be 54%.
Perfect.
But it is as
what are they going to do about the shadow?
It'll go. Well, there could be lots of shadows, and lights might be on at the ball up. If it was on at 1:30, you would imagine the lights are going to be on at about 9 a.m. On a day that's not as bright.
Perfect football weather.
Yep.
Top of the Ponsford next week with it's a makeup round too for members.
It is. It certainly is. I think we're going to leave it there for tonight. 2.5 hours plus. Back to our best. There you go. We'll be back next week. If you want to listen to the show live, then please head on over to Demonland.com on Monday night at 8:30 p.m. Thank you to our 5-star reviewer on Apple Podcasts. Thank you to Helena from Finland. Thank you to our commenters on our Facebook, Andrew L. and Vic from Bentley East. Thank you to our voicemailers, 3183D and 𝗟𝗲𝗀𝗃. Thank you to our callers, Enzo, Noah and Damo. Your questions and comments are an integral part of the show, so thank you to our Demonland posters who submitted questions and comments. Thank you to �what, D Old Fart, Binocular, Bigfoot, the Ox, Lazy, Mandy Lorian, Jane02, Ross Millen, Engorged Onion, Master Chief, Pitmaster, Oh My D's, Mr. Freeze, Pingo Damo, Leave It to Diva, Singer, Demon WA, Deceiving, Demon Dave, yes, it was a win for the ages, Smurf, Lefty, Red Jacket, Katrina, D's Fan, Denox, Royal Demon, Kiwi Demon, and Kev Martin, who did post a great question about our depth, but I've put a pin in that discussion for now, and I think we'll take a look at that after our first bye when we've played a few more games and had some more data from Casey, so just stay tuned for that. Thank you to my co-hosts, George and Bin Man, and thank you to you, our loyal listeners. Don't forget to leave us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast from. We'll read it out on the show. See you next week. Go Demons.
Go Red Leggers.